Okay. Good morning, everybody. We'll call this meeting to order. This is Joint Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources. And if staff would please call the roll.
Senator Guru,
Here.
Senator Landon,
Here.
Senator Salazar, Senator Schuler,
Here.
Representative Banks,
Here.
Representative Harrelson,
Here.
Representative Jennings,
Here.
Representative Knapp,
Here.
Representative Newsom,
Here.
Representative Sweeney,
Here.
Representative Williams,
Here.
Representative Winter,
Here.
Co-Chairman Ellis,
Present.
Chairman Flitner.
Present. Thank you. Again, good morning, everybody. Appreciate everybody being here for our last interim meeting and my last meeting. And we had a lovely evening last night, and I want to thank my co-chairman for making that happen, and as well as everybody else that was involved, and for all of you, your presence there last night. Again, it has been my great honor to serve the state of Wyoming and to serve this committee and the agencies that we serve. And so we have lots of work to do today. My work is not yet done. And first on the agenda this morning is Game and Fish, and I know Director Nesvik is not here, so whoever, Angie, will you please come forward, and whoever else you've brought along with you, and give the committee an update on how all things go with the Wyoming Game and Fish Department.
Good morning, Chairwoman Flitner and Chairwoman Ellis and committee members. Thanks for having us this morning. Yes, Angie Bruce, Deputy Director, Wyoming Game and Fish. I also brought with me today two experts here in the department to help me with some department updates. I'm going to give you an update regarding our collaborative work with USDA, and then I'm going to turn it over to Craig Smith, and he's going to give you an update with CWD status in the department. And Craig, even though as a new member of our leadership team, he's been with the department many years, and we just promoted him to Deputy Chief of Wildlife. So he's joining me. And then thirdly, I think you guys know Chief of Fisheries, Alan Osterland, and he's going to give us an update regarding the aquatic invasive species situation on the eastern part of the state that we've had develop recently. So with that, I'll just dive in if it pleases the chair.
Yes, ma'am.
So last week, the governor traveled to DC to sign an MOU with Secretary Vilsack of United States Department of Agriculture. You might have saw this in the press. And he didn't go there alone. We had stakeholders that went there with us. The Wyoming Wildlife Federation and Jim Magagna from the Stock Growers are to name a few of those. And really what this MOU did is really solidify a partnership that we've been working on with USDA over the last year, focusing on big game habitat, specifically migration corridors and other habitat within the state, and offering voluntary practices for private landowners in Wyoming. Now, where this all began was about a year ago today. USDA reached out to Wyoming and wanted to do something for private landowners in relationship to migration corridors. And so what we started with is we brought them to the state, and they sat down with a variety of stakeholders over 2 days. We had a lot of meetings, started with a meeting with the governor and followed with many stakeholder meetings. The stakeholders include everyone from county commissioners, landowners, land managers, our conservation organizations, our industry folks, all sitting around a table and them asking the question of, what do you guys want to see? Where could you use help? And the interesting thing that came from those 2 days of meetings was the surprise by the federal folks that came to Wyoming. One of the comments they made to me is they were surprised that no matter who the stakeholders were, that they were all saying the same thing. To me, that wasn't a surprise. That's what we do in Wyoming, right? We're in agreement. But for them, it was something unusual. and they were extremely impressed. And so some of the things they heard were the goal of keeping working lands working in Wyoming, to keep those wide open landscapes. And they also heard, of course, a lot of high value for Wyoming wildlife in the state. They also said any programs that are developed, they'd like to see those in a voluntary basis. So nothing regulatory, but optional for landowners to enter into. And third, and maybe the most important, is there was a clear message to the federal agencies that when it comes to migration corridors, any sort of recognition of those corridors should remain within the state's control and not the federal agency's control. So what happened next? The federal agency, specifically USDA, went back to Washington and went to the drawing board. They came back with 3 different items that they proposed for Wyoming landowners. And when you think of what they're able to do, they were limited by current restrictions in the Farm Bill. So even though maybe creating a brand new program would have been ideal for Wyoming, at this point in time, they had to look at what they had in existence within the Farm Bill and modify it as much as they can in order to meet the request of what they heard from those stakeholders. So they came up with 3 different areas to focus on. One of their existing programs, the Agriculture Conservation Easement Program, which offers landowners perpetual easements. That was one area. The second area that they wanted to focus on is their Grassland CRP, Conservation Reserve Program. A lot of folks might refer to this as habitat leasing, but it's a CRP program currently in existence, which offers landowners a contract 10 to 15 years in length, and then they receive a yearly payment per acre entered into this agreement. This agreement, along with the easement agreements, are to keep landowners doing exactly what they're doing, keep their ranches operational, and providing that wildlife habitat along the way. And then thirdly, conservation practices. They focused on their EQIP funds, Environmental Quality Incentive Program, where offering landowners payment to do things like wildlife-friendly fences, invasive species control, and improvements to their grasslands. So really, what does this mean for Wyoming? So this was kicked off at the Yellowstone 150th celebration earlier this year, where they announced an extra $5 million for Wyoming for those conservation practices. And for 2023, starting here in October, because we're looking at the federal fiscal year, this means an extra $16 million for Wyoming between conservation easements and those conservation practices. So again, this is a pilot program that USDA is focusing on Wyoming to do. They want to continuously learn if these programs work, what needs to be changed in these programs to make them more attractive to private landowners, and continue to get feedback from the landowners and the stakeholders, and then possibly take this program more across the West. So we're excited at this partnership. Our staff are involved and we are involved to make this productive and the best it can be in Wyoming, where it really allows Wyoming landowners to get rewarded for the habitat that they're currently providing to wildlife. With that, I'll stand for any questions before we move on to the next topic.
Thank you, Angie. Committee questions for the deputy? Well, I appreciate that. I was present at that meeting in Cody when they first arrived and we had those first conversations, and it's very important. Those corridors are vital to Wyoming wildlife for antelope and deer migration, and so it's a big deal for the vice chairman's neck of the woods, so thank you.
Absolutely. And then committee, I'll turn it over to Craig Smith to give you an update on CWD.
Thank you, Chairwoman Flitner, members of the committee. My intent here is to provide an update on the department's chronic wasting disease management plan and some of the efforts that we've taken on to date, and looking forward a little bit on what we might expect for the future. So to date, the department's management plan has directed the department to consider targeting hunt areas to take CWD samples across the state to increase our knowledge of prevalence of the disease in different hunt areas and different herd units across the state for deer and for elk. Those samples, as you may have seen recently, a news release that there's a new hunt area, Deer Area 155, which is over in the Grovant Range, kind of close in the Jackson area. And some of our sampling efforts are what detected the positive deer in that hunt area. We have also started doing some mandatory sampling across the state in certain hunt areas. There's a couple areas in the Laramie Range this year that are undergoing mandatory sampling. So when hunters harvest an animal, they're required by the regulations to submit the sample, and then also over in the Riverton area. So those are two things that we've done to date to increase our knowledge on the prevalence of the disease and how far it's spread. To date, we have 34 out of 37 deer herd units in the state have detected chronic wasting disease in it. So it's increasing every year. And going forward, really what we're looking at is increasing our public engagement about the adaptive management strategies that we have available to us in accordance with our management plan, and to keep our folks involved and get their buy-in and support to continue to try and track this disease and determine any ways that we can reduce prevalence or reduce the spread or deal with the disease adaptively. So really a very brief update. Those are some of the things that we've done, and going forward we hope to implement some more adaptive strategies to try to reduce the spread of chronic wasting disease across Wyoming. And I would take any questions.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Have you had any reduction in CWD, or are we just seeing it going up?
Madam Chair, Representative Newsom, for the most part across the state, we're seeing increasing prevalence. Yes.
Committee, further questions? Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's a real quick question. Obviously, my area is the mandatory area in the Laramie Range, and growing up in that area, watching the direct correlation between CWD increase and the fact that 100 miles on foot, you won't see a mature buck anymore in our area. It just doesn't happen. It's unbelievable. Obviously, we're learning more through the mandatory testing, but do we have a game plan at all as far as what? I mean, it kind of almost feels like, and I'm not at all upset by this. I'm just like, what do we do? I mean, is there an answer? Is there an option? I mean, do we have any idea if there's any herd in history that has adapted to the prions? I mean, where are we at? Do we have any idea?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Harrelson, the short answer to your question is that we don't have the silver bullet. We don't know what the answer is at this point. We're continuing to learn more on an annual basis through a lot of research in different states and within Wyoming. We're hopeful to find a way to reduce the spread, but a straight answer to your question about what can we do, or is there a herd that's ever shown any resilience against the disease? To date, we don't have any information that indicates that.
Follow up. Thank you, Madam Chairman. So, I mean, and I understand this is a long shot statement that I'm asking right now, but I mean, could we see this be the demise of the mule deer in America? I mean, because I've got a test site in Laramie County with the drought issues, Platte County with Laramie Range with the drought issues and everything, where in the last 5 years we've just seen it implode. Is that something is this a major concern that we could see this be the demise of the mule deer herds in not only Wyoming, but in the Midwest?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Harrelson, honestly, I don't know the answer to that question. I can't say definitively one way or the other. I can only kind of give you a higher level view that it's been present in Wyoming for 30 years. We still have mule deer to date. We're still working very hard to try to find any kind of inroads to address the disease. And I think over time that we will find ways to hopefully limit the spread, but I can't answer that definitively.
Committee, further questions? Yes, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I apologize for this being sort of an elementary question. I wish I knew more about this disease. I'm trying to learn as we go along, but is this something that some mule deer can get over? Or if they test positive for this disease, chronic wasting, are they just doomed?
Madam Chairwoman, Senator Landon, to date, we believe that in our research that's been done and across other states as well, that once an animal is infected, that it's fatal to the animal.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. My question relates to white-tailed deer. It's my understanding that they're a little more susceptible to this disease than mule deer. And so I'm concerned that we didn't get the job done on this last meeting to take care of the making white-tailed deer a separate species on the license versus the mule deer. And if the whitetail are more susceptible to this disease, why are we not work in that direction to, and it's probably our fault in this situation that we didn't get anything done with this change in the license deal for the deer. But what's your thoughts or your opinion of this? Is there any way to utilize our knowledge about white-tailed deer to turn this thing around?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Winter, my thoughts are first that yes, white-tailed deer do have tend to have a higher prevalence in the research that we've done and the sampling that we've done. Additionally, there is an ability right now to address white-tailed deer through general licenses and limited quota licenses. I think where our difficulties rise is sometimes white-tailed deer occupy a little bit different a range, if you will. For instance, I'm in the Sheridan area. We have a lot of subdivisions and urban areas where whitetail thrive, and it makes it very difficult to utilize hunting as a tool in some of those areas. And so we have to work with our engagement with the public and trying to find alternative ways to try to increase our harvest on whitetail deer in those areas.
Follow up?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, I thank you for that. And on my place, I know we just have lots and lots of white-tailed deer and no mule deer to speak of at all anymore. And I'm always finding dead white-tailed deer in the meadows there that have died from, I'm assuming, CWD. And so I would hope that the Game and Fish would really concentrate on this, and because I think the white-tailed deer is the problem. And so I think we need to address it specifically to them. So, and if we need to do something here again, well, I'll try to help inform people or educate them as to the problem. Thank you.
Madam Chair. Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. So my question is, so this has been in Wyoming more than 30 years, and it's been a problem for 40 years or 50. What is the other states or Canada, places like that, surely somebody's all sat around, smoked a cigar and had some ideas that might come forward to help mitigate this or some direction. Is there anybody else out there that's doing stuff with some ideas or some theories that what might work?
Madam Chairman, Representative Jennings, yes, there are a lot of other states and Canada as well that are conducting research, and have tried different management strategies in order to address the disease. There's been some success in terms of determining particular strategies and how they might affect the prevalence or the spread of the disease. But at the end of the day, there's nothing yet that will is the silver bullet. So as we continue to consider all of the research that's being done, both in the wild and in laboratory type settings, then we're hopeful that we can find some sort of an inroads to help alleviate the issues and reduce the impacts that it has. But I don't have a specific example unless you have a specific one in mind, sir.
Okay, thank you, Deputy. Appreciate it. Committee, further questions? Well, we know the work is desperate on the behalf of the game and fish, and we know how hard you're trying to find a solution to the problem. We'll hope and pray that it's out there somewhere for the sake of our deer species. So, thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you, and I apologize for jumping in after you, but I guess I want to just make sure that the department knows that if there's anything in terms of resources that you think might help, I do think we're at a real crossroads here for the mule deer, and I, for one, stand to help in any way that I can here in the legislature. So I think I speak for everyone here. Let us know if you find something that all it takes is resources. Maybe we can come up with something to help out.
Thank you. Anything further on CWD? Okay. Is it Alan is up next?
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members, thank you, and good morning. So this morning, I'm going to give you an update on AIS, another bright and sunny subject this morning. But this past year, we inspected 63,000 boats. We intercepted 58 that had mussels attached to them. That's an increase of previous years. We're still zebra mussel and quagga mussel free, but the zebra mussels continue to inch forward, getting closer to our state. In Colorado at Highline Lake, they detected a zebra mussel in the substrate there. Good news there is subsequent searches have found no other ones. That's on the west slope of Colorado near Loma. In July at Pactola Reservoir in the Black Hills in South Dakota, they discovered zebra mussels. And that's about 30 air miles from our northeast border, which is really concerning. Zebra mussels have been moving up the Missouri main stem for quite a while now, and have been spreading mostly to the east of the Missouri. This is a big jump across the state of South Dakota to the western side. So really raised our concern. Once we heard that, we had been making it mandatory that all boats coming from South Dakota that had been on the last water that was on the Missouri main stem or in the east, any waters east of that be mandatory inspection as they come into the state. Wyoming still has a perimeter approach where we're trying to check all watercraft coming from other states as they come to water. We do have inspection stations on some waters, but that's our primary approach. So as they were coming into South Dakota, all the boats that from the east side of the state were being decontaminated. When we heard about Pactola in July, we made it mandatory. We changed our protocols, made it mandatory that all boats coming from South Dakota, period, would be decontaminated. In September, we learned that boats that had been moored on Pactola Reservoir at the marinas there, as they were being removed, they were discovering live mussels attached to the hulls of these watercraft. So that increased our concern even more and made that threat even more imminent for us. So we put our heads together trying to figure out what the threat would be and looking at our data from our inspection stations and South Dakota's inspection stations, we discovered that boats destined for Wyoming waters next, the primary destination was Keyhole Reservoir, and the second one was Glendo. So we identified those two waters as our most highest risk. So working with state parks has been a tremendous collaborator with us on this effort. We put into a plan starting in October to try to funnel watercraft in certain locations to be inspected. And the reason for that is Wyoming's got, a lot of wide open spaces, not a lot of roads, but there's still a lot of roads that we can't cover under our current program as far as having inspection stations everywhere. And realizing that the threat was so imminent, we had to figure out with our current resources how we're going to best protect those waters. And to do that, we identified that if we could just focus our inspection efforts at one boat ramp at each of these reservoirs, that would best protect the waters. And for a lot of the state, fishing's over, but for Keyhole and Glendo, it gets good in the fall. So we knew that there's probably going to be some boats coming from out of state. We did have one tournament that had a lot of South Dakota watercraft coming into the state in Keyhole, so we knew that people are still coming to fish that water. And we know that people come from South Dakota to fish Glendo as well. And there's lots of back roads that they can come to do that. So working with state parks, we decided to close all the boat ramps on the water except for one. Whiskey Bay is still open on Glendo and Coulter Bay is still open on Keyhole. We have inspection hours from 7 to 7 on those waters. And then once at 7 a.m. in the morning is where we started out. We have a cable across all the rest of them and these current open boat ramps. 7 a.m. that cable comes down, people can use the ramp. We inspect during those open hours of the ramp. At 7 p.m., the cable would go up. And now as the hours of daylight is dwindling, it's daylight to dusk is the protocols that we're using right now. We get a lot of questions of why 7 to 7. Well, we try to do our best to cover all the daylight hours, but knowing that we only have so many people to cover those ramps, and safety for those people. And these are little critters, hard to see. So have to do those inspections in the daylight. These protocols are temporary. It was something that we had to do. We felt we had to react quickly once we discovered new information, boats on Pactola coming off with mussels attached. And then these protocols will be in place until the waters are capped, ice on. And that can be sooner up at Keyhole, hopefully sometime early December. Glendo, it could be, after Christmas, the way it's looking this year. But we'll do our best to have those ramps manned and inspected and provide all the opportunity for the anglers that we can and yet protect the resource. And then this winter, we'll sit down with state parks and other stakeholders trying to figure out a plan on how we're going to navigate the high use seasons and still provide opportunity and keep boat ramps open and protect the waters. I think with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Chief. Committee questions, we'll start to the far right with the good senator. The other good senator.
Yeah, the other. Thanks for delineating that. Thank you, Madam Chair. With relationship to Glendo, you think you've had pretty good success closing off all those smaller road ramps, there's a lot of them out there, and so I know it's been tough, but you feel like you got a pretty good coverage out there?
Madam Chair, Senator Guru, yeah. Like I mentioned, state parks has been awesome. So they physically put barriers on the ramps that are not to be used. And then we have the cable going across at Whiskey at hours where they're being closed.
Yeah. For next year, I know that you all keep information about fishing licenses, and I know the parks folks keep some information on who's using their camping areas, and then feed that information to tourism department. And they try to use that in conjunction to, say to folks when their license expires, hey, come on back to Wyoming. Can we use that the other way and say, get more information out to those potential boaters, anglers and stuff that are coming about the problems we're facing, why we're doing what we're doing? Because I know, I'm just thinking of my dad, if he can't fish at 5:30 in the morning, he wouldn't go. But if he knew there was a specific reason, and not just because y'all didn't want to get out of bed, that there was for a greater good, I think they'd be a lot more for it. Most people I know in the fishing community feel that way. A lot of times they just don't know.
Madam Chair, Senator Guru, yeah, that's an excellent idea. And we have, for the future for sure, this go around, we've tried to use Facebook, reach out to our communications folks on license holders. We're doing a press release weekly to give updates on it. We've had in-person meetings in some communities trying to get the message out. So in the future for next year's plan, yeah, I think that every kind of opportunity we can, especially and we've also tried to notify South Dakota boaters of the changes as well. And we'll have to do Colorado outreaches and to make sure that those folks know as well. But you're right, a lot of folks like to get out there early, and then some of them like to get out late and trying to figure that out. And it's going to be a challenge.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. As my good friend Senator Landon was saying about the last issue with CWD, the same thing. Any help, let us know. If there's any help that we can be as we go through budget and all that to try to get that word out. Also, I'll be interested to hear, as far as whatever information you come up with regards to other lakes and other areas, because same thing's happening in the southwest corner, and same thing up in our area, the northwest corner, as folks coming in from out of state and, taking advantage of the great fishing that we have and stuff. So I got a feeling this is going to be more something that you're going to see at most lakes, if not all, if we're going to stop this for now. Thank you. Thank you.
Vice Chairman Schuler.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Yeah, question I had was, sounds like you've done a great job, 63,000 boats that you've checked and 58, I think, I noted. I was just interested in knowing where the majority of those came from. You talked quite a bit about South Dakota, but I wondered how many were coming from Colorado or Utah? And also, just as a follow-up, do you have good coordination with those other states in terms of what we're doing versus what they're doing? Thank you.
Chief?
Madam Chair, Senator Schuler. So to answer your first question on where they're coming from, Evanston Port of Entry is our busiest area, and Lake Powell's been a huge concern with quagga mussels. So the majority of the ones that we're finding with fragments or something on the boats, of those 58 have been coming from that area. But we do get boats that come from Texas, Michigan, Minnesota, that come through the major artery of I-80 that get checked as they're coming in. And boats have been moored on like the Great Lakes for long periods of time will have, lots of mussels on them. So there's some of those boats as well. As far as relationships, we work really, really well with Utah, Colorado. South Dakota's been great on giving us information on what's going on over there and giving us some lessons learned as far as they've experienced with communication, and giving us some options as far as tools in the toolbox for us to use going forward. So I hope I answered all your questions.
Thank you. And Chief, the states surrounding us where obviously they've been infected, did they take the same kind of proactive approach to avoid this that the state of Wyoming has?
Madam Chair, that's a great question, and the responses vary, differ. For some states that already have them, it's not as big of a concern. They're just trying to manage where they're going in their state. We're one of the few states left in the west here that doesn't have them. So the response certainly varies. In our mind, as far as I've heard the comment, well, it's coming. What's the point? The point for us is that, we don't think we can just throw up our hands and say it's going to happen because the risk and the impacts to potentially for our ecosystems and water delivery systems is too great. And in my mind, the longer that we can deter them coming into the state, the more hope that we have that there'll be some kind of science that's developed to eradicate or treat them. In the Great Lakes, they're working hard on that. They've been dealing with it for a lot of years. And so the longer we can keep them out of the state, I think the farther we'll be ahead.
And Chief, just to follow up too, then in terms of resources, what has the Game and Fish had to do in terms of diverting resources to deal with AIS and obviously state parks as well? I know you can't speak for state parks. I know YDOT has also been helpful in this cause. I just want to make sure, like when we talk about the legislative body and what we might be able to do, we want to make sure that our agencies have all the resources that they need. And I know that when you talk about, your original game plan for what your task is, I don't believe AIS in protecting the state from that invasion was probably part of the original game plan for Game and Fish. And so you've probably had to redirect a lot of resources to that. So if you can speak to that for this committee's sake and for this legislature's sake, I'd appreciate that.
Thanks, Madam Chair, for that question. And since 2010, when we first started, we had one full-time employee, and we had lots of temporaries, and we've grown that number to about 50, 55 seasonals during the open water season. We've grown the program now with 4 more additional FTEs. Those positions come from within the agency, pulling from other divisions, so diverting workload to the AIS program. We do have some, about 40-45% of the program's funding comes from the DCAL program. And then another third comes from federal partners and grants, and then the remainder is made up from sportsman's dollars. In my mind, financially, it takes bodies, and to man these stations, it takes equipment to decontaminate these boats and these remote locations, places where we can put people up to work their job. We've been really trying to work with our congressional delegation to get more funding support, more federal dollars to implement the program. It could have significant impacts on our ecosystems, but from a Bureau of Reclamation standpoint, it could have significant impacts to water delivery as well. And all the help that we can get from them is certainly appreciated.
Appreciate it. Committee, further questions? Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. My question goes back to Ms. Bruce about the migration corridors. It's my concern that these ag programs, these easements, are being directed by our current Washington administration, and I refer to the 30/30 land grab program and I worry that these may be relative to that. And I was wondering if it'd be possible for the Game and Fish to investigate that a little bit and see about if these easements that are brought to bear here would have anything changed in them relative to in perpetuity and that sort of thing, which would certainly lend credence to that 30/30 land grab. And we want to keep that from happening if at all possible. And I know the governor is now aware of it, and so we just need to be cautious, I think, to whether we support that stuff or not. So thank you.
Yeah, Madam Chair, if I could respond, Representative Winters, thank you for bringing that up. I like to think that this effort and this initiative would be happening even if 30/30 was not happening. A lot of these programs have existed for years, and so it's making them, tweaking them and amending them to make them more, to meet the needs of Wyoming. With that, we have heard that message, and so about permanent easements, and is permanent easements always the way to go? So with this effort, there's a large emphasis put on these 10 to 15-year contracts. And that's, really what we're hearing from landowners that they want to see. So there's a lot of input put on that sort of end and not just the permanent easement. So adding additional options and additional tools. But again, these programs have been available for years, and I actually asked that exact question to our USDA partners that we're working with on this. Is this part of 30/30? And, at the end of the day, we said, we'd be doing this anyway. If that, sort of Washington goal was not there. So this is exactly what our stakeholders want, and we're responding to them.
Thank you. Committee? Yes, Senator.
Madam Chairman, thank you very much. If I could go back to AIS for just a moment. My skepticism early on was just simply the fact that we weren't taking a global approach. I never liked the fact that we were taxing our sportsmen. You just happen to own a boat, so you're going to pay for the AIS program. My question to the department would be, is that still adequate? I mean, the taxation that we put on those boats, is that adequate to run it? It feels like this thing is becoming bigger and bigger, and if we're going to hold the line and stay undefeated, it feels like we got to draft something else. Can you comment on that a little bit? What sorts of resources are we gaining out of those stickers that we're putting on our boats? And is it adequate?
Chief?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Senator Landon, great question. So watercraft continues to be a primary vector of transport for those critters. It does, but the impacts to the state is not just to anglers. Right? It's to a lot of different, for everybody really. And any help that we can get is surely appreciated, whether it comes in the form of financial help or whether it comes in the form of manning check stations. As far as personnel, it's certainly helpful. Yeah, I get that question all the time on, and we work really hard trying to secure all the grant opportunities we can, and we do get some assistance from Bureau of Reclamation, Forest Service, different places, but as the threat gets more imminent, it's going to cost more money to man these check stations, more personnel, more equipment, and so yeah, any help that we can get would alleviate the impact on sportsmen's dollars specifically and watercraft users.
Thank you for that. Madam Chairman, just a comment on top of that. I think it's nice that we have a couple of our appropriators in the room, and I have long felt like maybe our water programs and other areas of our budget should be helping in this effort. I I would just encourage that we not shut that door. I think a little more global approach to try to hold the line, if we're going to get serious, that it's going to take that. So thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman and Senator Landon. I agree with you wholeheartedly, as does my co-chairman too. So I hope that in the future, there might be an opportunity for more stakeholders to jump in and dive in and assist with the efforts on behalf of the Game and Fish. All right, thank you, Chief. Thank you, Deputy Director. We appreciate everybody's time. Thank you, new Assistant Chief Deputy. Good luck with your new job. All right, let's keep rolling, committee. Our next microphone keeps checking out on me. Our next agenda item is the Wyoming Wildlife Task Force. And again, Director Nesvik is not here. And I believe the Deputy Director will join us, but I will be the one that will be presenting this Bill Draft 23 LSO 0317, and I brought in some of my fellow task force members to join me, and with your permission, committee, I'll just stay here. I've asked Senator Kinski to be here, Chairman Lee Livingston, Park County Chairman, and online we have Josh Corsi. Hopefully he is there and he can join us as well. Josh is the co-chairman of the Wildlife Task Force. And as soon as he joins us, I'll just walk you through the bill quickly, and then we are available to answer any questions. Hello, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning, Madam Chair.
Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. And I've just introduced the bill, and we're going to walk through it quickly, and then we're glad that you're here to answer any questions that the committee might have.
Thank you for having me, and thank you all for your service to Wyoming.
So committee, this will be the last bill that this committee will see presented to you with work from the Governor's Wildlife Task Force. And this is in an effort to stave off budgetary concerns that may come with species loss with regard to our mule deer population in the state of Wyoming, and also the fact that the experience to hunt in Wyoming is a good one, and it's an important one, and we leave money on the table, so to speak. I think hunting in Wyoming is unlike any place else in North America, and so that's really the derivation of this bill, and it effectively would change and increase the non-resident fee for both, or for the 3 species of elk, deer, and antelope. Again, it would amend on page 1, statute 23-2101, and the meat of the bill and the change is on page 3, where it gets into, well, it begins with paragraph F and moving into subsection J, and then little Romanette 1 through 3, and 1 is the non-resident elk license fee increase, 2 is the deer license fee increase, and then 3 is the antelope fee increase. Section 2 is charging the Game and Fish Commission to promulgate the rules necessary by January 1, 2024, and then section 3 is the effective date, January 1, 2024. And then it begins with paragraph B on page 4. And it's a simple bill, but of course, I'm sure you've got questions. And again, that's why I brought in the A-team to join me. So with that, we would stand for your questions. Vice Chairman Newsom.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. How do these fees compare to our surrounding states for their out-of-state hunting?
Senator Kinski, I know you are an expert on, or Senator Hicks, I'm sorry, on some of our surrounding states and what their fees are. So if you could answer that question, that would be terrific.
So, Madam Chairman, Representative Newsom, I've got a spreadsheet here that I'll share with you a little bit later, but specifically, I don't have an exact analysis of this, but you have to understand that we now have a bifurcated license system. We have a special, and that's what this does, is only raises those special license fees, and then we have the regular for non-residents. So it would be an average of those, and the average would put us somewhere near the high end of the 11 western states average. So this would be the highest non-resident license, right? But it only comprises 40% of all the non-resident licenses that we issue. So the bill only contemplates raising that 40% of those non-resident licenses. It keeps the other 60% of those non-resident licenses that the state allocates out at a level that is below the West-wide median. The average price, then, the average price is going to be somewhere near the top of the highest two other western states. Madam Chairman, I hope that answers the question. It is very complicated, but in my opinion, it keeps those price differential as an average non-resident price within a regional norm.
Follow-up? Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman. So in these special licenses, this 40%, the only thing special about them is that a hunter is willing to pay more in order to attain these licenses.
Senator?
Is that?
So, Madam Chairman, that is absolutely correct. And I would defer to my colleague if there's an explanation as to why we did that initially. This program's been in place for well over a decade, in fact, going on nearly 2 decades, that the state of Wyoming has had a bifurcated, 2 different price system for non-residents. So it's nothing new. And again, trying to strike the balance of for those that have the financial ability to pay that. Subsequently, we are able to keep all of those other 60% of those non-resident prices at a much lower rate, and also resident prices at a lower rate. So but it has some other tangible benefits to the state also, and I would defer to my colleagues to answer that question.
Thank you, Senator Hicks. Committee, further questions? Yes, Vice Chairman Schuler.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a quick question on the fees. When I first looked at those, the first thing I wondered was, you didn't double them. And I just thought it was kind of interesting, from 576, we go to 1258, 288 to 826 and so on. Was there a reason for those particular fees? Was it based on, again, what was happening in the states around us? Or how did you come up with those fees, just out of curiosity?
Chairman Corsi, would you like to answer that question?
Yes, I'd be happy to, Madam Chair. And Senator Schuler, I think you're actually right on the money there. And what we had done as a task force was look at what some of the other states and the licensing was. And then that price, that 40%, as Senator Hicks had just mentioned, just specific to the special draw, when you add in the other cost to hunt fees, which would include the application fee, conservation stamp, license fee, we looked at what that would put that total at, and that is where we found this recommendation to move forward.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Livingston, how are you? Being an expert in the field, in your view, would you feel these prices are going to diminish outfitters in their quest to get hunters out here to fill those tags when they come out?
Commissioner
Madam Chair,
Livingston.
Senator Grew, no, I do not believe it will. There's a demand out there. It's shown in the applications, not just with outfitted clients, but with do-it-yourself folks that come to Wyoming. They want to come to Wyoming, and they're willing to pay the fees that it takes to come to Wyoming. It lends a certain degree of certainty for, again, maybe the outfitted client and the do-it-yourselfer that wants to plan years ahead. So to answer your question, Senator, I do not believe it will.
Good question. Follow-up? Sure.
Yeah, just a bit. I asked that, of course, because, you know, my district, there's a lot of outfitters and a lot of people come hunt on their own. While these prices aren't going to scare anybody that comes to Jackson, Jacksons look like Jackson prices to me, and I always got told by an old friend of mine, if half your customers ain't bitching about your prices, they're not high enough. So I don't have a problem with it, but I just wanted to make sure I heard it from an outfitter. Thank you.
Committee, further questions?
Madam Co-Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Just a curiosity, can you explain the effective date? Section 2 says Game and Fish shall start writing these rules, and it all has to come online by January 1st, 2024. I'm just wondering why we just don't have an effective date that says January 1st, 2024, and leave it at that. Game and Fish would know to write the rules, but I'm wondering if there's any reason why that's worded that way.
Senator, do you have an answer to that? I don't. Maybe Game and Fish will answer that for us, so.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
if I may, I might speculate on this. The non-resident elk drawing application period is the month of January, and it could be an attempt to have this in place prior to that application period.
Yes.
Maybe LSO has a thought, because it would seem like if we just had this act is effective January 1st, 2024, that's just cleaner. I just don't know why there's the immediate rulemaking. I think that's an understood thing.
Madam Chair, and Chairwoman Ellis, I think that the committee could kind of go either way on that. I included the rulemaking provision because that was in the draft that was provided to me. I think by these changes, the Game and Fish Commission could just go ahead and make those changes. It's just, yeah, it was more of a trying to make sure we're crossing all the T's, dotting all the I's.
Okay. Thank you, Luke. Maybe once we hear from Game and Fish, we'll have a better understanding. Further questions? Did you have a question, Representative Haroldson?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Okay, I'm going to wade into this a little bit. $826 for a mule deer. I got a buddy who'd walked 78 miles over the course of the last 5 days and saw 2x2s or less. If we're producing a product here, which we are, this is part of our tourism package, and you come to the Laramie Range to shoot a mule deer, it's your dream hunt, you got your points, you got your deal, you spend $826 for your license, and you come out there and you walk for a week, and let's say you put 200 miles in, and you don't see a buck over 2 years old, we got a problem. That's not and I understand, well, it's drought, and it's CWD and stuff, but the quality of our hunts are going down, and our prices are gonna go up. Do they need to go up? $288, we're one of the cheapest states there is. They do need to go up. Do they need to go up to $826? I don't know. You guys, we gotta start, it's not like we're producing a better product at this point. We're producing an inferior product due to our droughts and our CWD. Our elk numbers are pretty solid. I believe our elk are a good thing. But right now, antelope's down across the state at an astronomical rate due to, at least I know for sure our area, but I believe almost every area in the state has got detriment on our antelope, detriment on our mule deer, detriment on our whitetail. And I don't know, I just think that we need to be careful. If we're not careful, we're gonna price ourselves out of our product.
Chairman, anybody care to comment? No, don't you think? Yeah, Chairman, go ahead.
Yes, I appreciate your comments, Representative Haroldson, and your earlier comments when you had made the reference specific to mule deer. Is this the demise of mule deer in America? I think that is a concern that we all hold very dear. In regards to this pricing, I think the one point I would like to bring up that I think is worth some great merit, and specifically looking at the elk, which you had referenced, elk is doing very well. There was over 30,000 applicants, non-resident applicants for just the 7,250 tags last year. And I really think that this is just more of a question of bringing us into the market of what our neighboring states have, and the demand is clearly there. Wyoming still has a great product, and people still want to come to Wyoming. But I do share your concerns. I do think that you're on to really where I'm at every day and what my thoughts are with mule deer.
Thank you, Chairman. Committee, further questions of the people in front of us? Do you have a question, Representative?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
Go
you,
ahead.
Madam Chairman. So my question is Senator Hicks, so, and referencing back to your co-chair. So on page 3, what you said there was in your beginning testimony that nothing changed except the fees. So what promulgated rules might need to be changed here? It's saying that they have to promulgate rules. What are we changing?
Madam Chairman, I would ask the department to answer that question. I mean, it's an agency process. What they would have to change in rules. Really, I think that's a question for the department.
Right. Vice Chairman?
So what are the prices for the other 60% of these licenses?
So, Madam Chairman, if you walk through this, I'll walk you through the spreadsheet, because what I would like to do at the end is propose maybe an amendment to the bill, not to jeopardize the bill, but for another reason. But so if you look at this, on the left side of the spreadsheet, it shows each state. Now these,
Senator, can you bring your mic a little closer to your mouth? Sorry.
yes,
Thank you.
Madam Chairman. So if you look at that spreadsheet, on the left side of that, it shows each one of our surrounding and western states. And then the next column shows antelope, the next one deer, elk, on sheep, moose, goat, and bison. And then under each one of those states, it has a series of numbers. And those numbers are to calculate the total license cost. So in many states, you have to acquire an access permit. You have to have a conservation stamp. Each state has an own scheme. Some states you have to buy a hunting license and then you apply for individual tags. And so what that reflects is the actual cost of a license in those states. Now, this data is about 3 years old. I am aware that at least one state has actually increased, and I think 2, being New Mexico and Utah, has done some modifications to this. But this would be just show you what the trends are. So if we look at deer, and you go down that right-hand column, you can see Arizona's average is $475. But then you go down to Idaho, it's $568. You get to Montana, now it's $682. You go down to Oregon, it's $624. And you get down to Utah, has a bifurcated process, not dissimilar to what we do. They're $737 for a deer license. So is everybody tracking me with their? So what I did is then try to go down, and the next price, it shows a range of price. So the cheapest deer price is $321, most expensive is $737. And then I took the average, so if you average all of those, and then I said, realistically, if you go back to the left-hand column, it says average of the top 4 states and average of the top 2 states. And arguably, Wyoming is probably in the top 2 for most of these species as far as quality and desirability. And if you look at hunter applications, you know, how many people actually are applying highly sought after tags. And so if you just take that top 2 average, it would tell you that for our market, that average deer price is 3 years ago was $656. And so keep in mind, what we're doing is only raising that 40%. We still have that 60% of those licenses that are going to be way below what that regional average is. If you take the median price of the 40 and the 60, it puts us somewhere right there close to whatever those top 2 to top 4 state average cost is. So it gets back, this was an attempt to say, if we produce a commodity here in Wyoming, let's call it an experience, what's that experience worth to relative to Colorado, Montana, all of our neighbors? And what it shows you is all of these are, most of these are all overprescribed. And every Western state, they're overprescribed. So what's the value of that? And is Wyoming getting fair market value to provide this experience to go deer hunting? And the answer is we were underpriced. We're under the market, folks. And so, you know, maybe the example that Representative Harrelson, it wasn't just a deer. It was an opportunity, folks, to come and spend a week or two in Wyoming doing something that these people passionately desire to do. Just because you bought a license doesn't guarantee you get to shoot something. We are selling an experience. And so when I run through this whole analysis across the board for these species, this is not an unreasonable license fee increase. And again, this program, the reason that went in place was really to help support those local communities, to bring in a certain number of hunters that had the financial ability to either hunt on private property, contract with an outfitter, do it yourself with a higher level of guarantee you're going to draw that tag. In exchange for that, we are able to maintain those youth licenses at a below market price, the average resident below the market price, and those 60% of those other non-resident hunters below the market price. And so it's really an opportunity, I think, that accomplishes a lot of things for both our industry, our hospitality industry, whether you got motels, restaurants, sporting goods, to have a certain clientele that's going to come in here and spend a lot of money in the state of Wyoming, at the same time keep, for the average guy, you know, that's hunting out there for meat, even a non-resident, a license fee that's below the Western market, to provide that dual opportunity and use the voluntary. See, this is a voluntary program. You don't have to apply for this high price license. You can choose to apply for the other pool. I mean, so it's really a voluntary program, and trying to tap into a resource to bring these prices up to a market level commensurate for that experience that we're selling.
Thank you, Senator. Follow up?
Thank you. Senator Hicks, I certainly appreciate all of the work that went into this spreadsheet. My question was, I was looking for three numbers. What does out of this 40% program on the 60% program, what does a non-resident elk, deer, and antelope license go for in the 60% program?
So my associate here is quickly running the math on that.
And it's further.
I apologize.
It's all right. It's further down in the statute, those fees, but I'm sure when the department comes forward, they can provide those numbers for you.
We can have that information
Absolutely.
available for you.
Good question. Committee, further questions for good Senator? And
Madam Co-Chair?
yes, ma'am.
Just a quick comment. There is a feature in Excel called Print Grid Lines, and you can follow along so much easier. I'm struggling. But I also can't see, so don't mind me.
Senator, you don't have to answer that if you don't want to.
Madam Chairman, I had my staff work on this morning, which
staff.
is me, and they're not very tech savvy. So
Yeah, you need to fire your assistant.
I need to fire my assistant and get a
Yes.
new assistant.
Absolutely. I thank you both. Appreciate it. Please stand by in case there are further questions. So if the
Madam-
department could, yes, sir.
Madam Chair, I do have a proposed amendment if the committee was interested in
Okay.
entertaining that discussion, and I
All
don't
right.
know when you would like to do that.
Well, let's go ahead and throw it out there.
So, Madam Chairman, when the task force looked at this, we had spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to thread the needle for a lot of reasons. We looked at strict outfitter allocations, changing ratios, better landowner compensation. So we spent almost a year trying to figure out how to address a lot of these issues. And this is where we ended up where we had the highest level of consensus. Wasn't 100%, but it was 90% of the task force members, as my recollection is. The one thing that we didn't do, because last year the legislature, as a result of the task force, changed those allocations for those, what we call the big five. And many of you recommend that's, moose, sheep, goat, bison, and grizzly bear. We didn't go back as the task force and say, are these license fees for the big five, should they also be adjusted as part of this same legislation? And so I had a conversation with the director, certainly something the department I don't think has a strong position on, but certainly wasn't opposed to going in. And if we're going to do these, as you guys know in the legislature, anytime we go into any type of fee increases, it's always difficult that, again, to bring those 5 up to what the market is. What is that Western market for these highly coveted licenses? I would propose that we include license fee increases on those non-resident licenses for sheep, moose, goat, bison, and grizzly, in the event that we are ever able to hunt those in the state of Wyoming. And so the amendment would be just to come right off of the spreadsheet. Again, what's the market value of those? The market value, if we take the top 2 average, roughly for a sheep license is $3,000. We charge $2,200. Moose should be $2,750, goat $2,750. We vastly undersell our wild bison licenses for their any bison. And so if you look at that, Arizona charges $5,575 for a wild bison. South Dakota, our nearest neighbor, is $6,540. I just took that 2-year median and said, if we were inclined to amend the bill, we would just go into that same subsection and change those license prices to $3,000 for non-resident sheep, $2,750 for moose, $2,750 for goat, and $6,000 for wild bison.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Just a question. Senator Hicks, was that a recommendation then also adopted by the task force, or is that just an amendment that you've been thinking about?
Madam Chairman, Senator Ellis, the task force did not discuss this, and I think more than anything, it was just an oversight with all the work. So this is not a specific recommendation from the task force. Certainly, Madam Chairman, we could do this once we get in here. The task force will be meeting again this week or this month. We could bring this back and see if we could get an affirmative recommendation one way or another on that, if that was the committee's disposition. But I would like to present it as for consideration at this time.
Okay, thank you. Committee?
Madam
Discussion?
Chairman.
Yes,
So,
Representative Sweeney.
thank you, Madam Chairman. So thank you, Senator Hicks. And you don't look anything like Kinsky.
Sorry.
By the way, so,
I don't know why I did that.
So my only problem is that in the line on the increases, you've used 90-10. So were these the recommendations of, I haven't read through Mountain Pursuit's email all the way, but is that following their line? When you put Wyoming 90-10 non-resident license fees, is that your suggestions? Obviously, it's not the task force, but.
Madam Chairman, Representative Sweeney, are you talking specifically to the proposed amendment or for the bill, the current bill at its draft now?
The proposed amendment.
Yeah, and so a year ago, we already have passed 90-10 for those big 5. So that was a recommendation that did come out of the task force. It passed the legislature. So that is currently the statute is 90-10 for those big 5.
So thank you for that clarification. So really, the 90-10 is on that bill, not Rob Schall's recommendations.
Well, that's in statutes. That really
No,
has nothing to do
I mean,
with any outside recommendations. So,
Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Madam Chairman.
So that's these numbers specifically on the big 5 has nothing to do with his email that we received last night.
Senator Hicks, I believe, isn't even aware of the email that was sent to this committee, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's correct, Madam
Right.
Chairman.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
committee, further questions? It does present an opportunity, and I wouldn't disagree with your suggestion in terms of the amendment to allow, I mean, if we're going to open the statute, we're going to increase non-resident fees, but I would like to hear from Chairman Corsi and also Commissioner Livingston too on their thoughts as task force members on this amendment. Chairman Corsi.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I do appreciate what amendment Senator Hicks has brought forward, and I do believe that that was probably just an oversight by the task force, knowing that we had already moved the Big Five to 90-10, and at that time, we're not looking at license fees. But in what Senator Hicks is proposing as an amendment, I think that the task force could certainly get this on our agenda for our November 18th meeting and really just do that deep dive into looking at what Senator Hicks had described as a competitive market for what we are underselling on those species. And I would think that there would be a favor by our task force to look at that, just like we have with the deer, elk, and antelope, to move a recommendation to you for consideration.
Thank you. Lee?
Madam Chair, I would agree with Chairman Corsi. It's something we can discuss. We spent hundreds of hours, you were there, and listening and reading public comment, and I think it was just an oversight on not bringing up a license fee increase on the Big Five. It was a pretty big effort just getting them to 90-10.
Okay.
I would think that the task force would be willing to visit more about it the next meeting.
Absolutely. So committee, then you're tasked with making the decision whether or not to accept the amendment and then allow the task force to go back and discuss it and decide whether or not to get behind the amendment or not, or whether to have Senator Hicks bring that amendment, if this bill is to go forward, bring it in the session, so.
Madam Co-Chair?
Yes, ma'am.
I think just something to think about too is, if we don't amend this today, the task force meets again. I think the title is broad enough where it could be brought as an amendment later on. I just get nervous about having it in there as a placeholder because it might guide the unbiased discussion of the task force. And I think that's something I have valued, is that we've listened to you. And I think by putting that in there, then it's like, well, you need to listen to us. You need to talk about this. You need to figure out the right number. And I don't like that approach because I've liked how it's worked this other way. But if I'm wrong, I'd like to know that if LSO or Game and Fish or someone else thinks the bill title wouldn't allow for that amendment later on during the session, if this were to advance, that'd be good to know. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And Luke, do you have any thoughts on that? Are we good with the bill title?
Madam Chairwoman, yes, currently, I think as it states, you're relating to Game and Fish, it does specifically mention the provisions of elk, deer, and antelope hunting licenses, but it does allow for amending license fees.
Okay.
So I think there is room there.
Okay. Well, yes, Representative Sweeney?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So just a point of clarification for me on the Big Five. So the current bill, which I think it's a great idea, and I would hope we could move it forward so it's in place. And then back to task force. So the way the bill, as I understand it, contemplates for non-residents in elk, deer, and antelope, kind of two distinct classes. So how do we put into this, because we don't want, in the Big Five, that's a hunt of a lifetime. And so how do can we specifically split, so that there aren't two distinct classes there for the Big Five?
So, Madam Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Representative Sweeney, it's just a matter of, currently in statute, there is no 40-60 split for the Big Five. It's just a single fee. All we do is adjust that. And that's all that would happen for those 5 species, is it just that. It doesn't change any ratio. It's still at the current ratio between resident, non-resident, number of non-resident tag. None of that changes at all.
Follow-up?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So, Senator, did you have your staff prepare an amendment?
For handouts?
Madam Chairman, I did not, but it is relatively simple
It
because
is.
you go into the exact same section and it's just subsection Roman at XXI and just change that fee. So it statutorily construct, it's fairly simple. Because
Yes.
we're working within actually even the same subset within that 23, whatever it is. So.
Very good. Thank you, Senator. We will ponder your amendment. We'll hear next from the department. So please stick around. And again, thank you. And Josh, don't leave us. The Game and Fish Department would please come forward. Deputy Director Bruce and the A-team.
Chairwoman, if I can jump right in. Listening to the conversation, I heard 3 primary questions that I think we'll first attempt to answer for you. And brought with me today is Greg Phipps, and he is our Fiscal Division Chief, and Jennifer Doreen, who is our Licensed Section Supervisor. So the questions that I heard, first of all, was Chairwoman Ellis's concerns about the dates, effective date versus rulemaking dates. I will lean on the expertise of this committee and LSO, as long as we have that January 1st, 2004, like Senator Hicks says, so that we are not implementing this right in the middle of the application period. We are totally fine with amendments like Ellis discussed earlier. The second question we heard asked was, what rules will need to be developed regarding this if this bill were to be successful? I'll turn it over to Jennifer, who's going to address that.
Madam Chairman, all of our licensing rules are in Chapter 44. So depending on what comes out of this, we would need to take Chapter 44, our licensing bill, through the rulemaking process and to our Wyoming Game and Fish Commission.
Jennifer, just if you could give the committee an idea on a timeline, what's involved with that? I mean, this seems like a simple change for the commission, but if you could just kind of help us with that, just to navigate the timeline.
Madam Chair, so we would take out for public comment, Chapter 44, I believe that's a 60-day public comment period before it's presented to the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission for their adoption. But it is imperative that all of those rule changes are in effect by January 1 of 2024, when we open our application period for elk, deer, and antelope.
Okay. Committee, questions for Jennifer? Representative Jennings, do you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So what would that look like? Would you leave the 60-day requirement in for everything else, but we would specifically have to change the rule for this so that there wasn't public comment for 60 days?
Jennifer, I'm not sure I'm understanding your question, Representative.
Madam Chair, I'm saying, if I heard her statement correctly, we're going to have to fiddle with the 60-day public comment because we're going to approve this. And so you're going to pull that out of the rules, and that's one of the changes that you would have to promulgate and change. What would that look like? Because you'd still have to have 60-day on everything else, or are we just making a special case here?
Jennifer?
Madam Chair, Representative Jennings, so when we take Chapter 44 in front of the commission, any changes are out for a 60-day public comment. So this would just be one of those changes, as well as any other changes we would take to Chapter 44, is we always take a 60-day public comment period
before we present that to the commission. So the commission has those public comments as well. I believe that's part of the rulemaking process with the Secretary of State's office.
Thank you. Follow-up?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So was there any public comment on this other than the task force?
Yes, much public comment. Jennifer, you can, and Angie, you guys have that data as well, so Greg.
Yeah, Chairman Flitner, if I could address just the third question that we heard earlier as well, which is the non-resident license cost currently. I think that came from Newsom, if I'm right.
Madam Chair, Representative Newsom. So to go over the current fees for non-resident for that regular price, which is the 60%, the non-resident elk fee is $692. The non-resident deer is $374, and the non-resident antelope is $326.
Sure.
So this may be a question for the task force, or as I'm trying to understand this. So what we have currently is 40% of the licenses for non-residents are less expensive than the regular fee. Because as I read this, the non-resident license fee in this 40% is at $576, and the non-resident fee, as just described, is $692. And so it seems like the 40% at this point is less expensive than the 60%. And so is the aim of this to switch that so that the 40% is more expensive than the 60%? I see shakes of heads, and so I'm just trying to understand if we're flipping the 40 and 60 to make 40% more expensive when at this time they're less expensive.
Jennifer.
Madam Chair, Representative Newsom, the fees that are proposed here are an additional fee on top of those fees I just provided. So currently, the fee for a non-resident special elk, that 40%, is $1,268 compared to the regular 60% fee of $692. So the language in the draft bill is the fee increase on top of and in addition to those fees I just provided you.
Okay, so just for my clarification, so a non-resident elk under this 40% program would be $692 plus 12, so it would be, what, $2,100? What ballpark?
Jennifer.
Madam Chair, Representative Newsom, that is correct. So the fee based on this change that the task force is being recommended would be $1,950 compared to $692.
Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate it.
Thank you for the question. Committee, further questions for the department?
Madam Co-Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. So I am looking at this, and I don't know, the regular 60% falls under paragraph J. This bill just deals with paragraph F, so I don't know if you have a thought on whether or not you can just add, if we were to adopt an amendment for the other species that Senator Hicks mentioned. I'm a little worried it's outside the bill title, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Do you have a thought?
Yeah, Chairwoman Ellis, I think I would defer to your expertise here, LSO. The bill title seems pretty broad, and it is that a proposed amendment by Senator Hicks does fall within this statute, but not sure that I can clearly answer that question for you today.
And Madam Chairman, I think it does. I think that the license clearly would allow for that. I think it's very broad. So I think it'll just be a matter of whether or not the committee's ready to attach that at this time. Further questions of the department? Thank you, all of you. Hi, Greg. Appreciate you being here. Thank you. Thank you. Any other agency heads here that need to address this bill? All right, we'll open this to public comment. Is there anybody that would like to provide public comment? Anybody online?
Yes, Madam Chairman, we have two people online. Cy Gilliand and Rob Shaw.
Okay, if you'd let Cy in, please. Cy is also a fellow task force member, as well as head of, president, I believe, of the Outfitters and Guides Association.
Madam Chairwoman, can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can't see you, but we can hear you.
Okay, well, that's always better anyway. I apologize for the background noise. I'm in a coffee shop in Alpine, Wyoming.
You're in a coffee shop where?
In Alpine, Wyoming,
Oh, okay.
trucking horses today. Thank you for members of the committee. Thank you for listening to my testimony today. I would like to speak as the current president of the Wyoming Outfitter and Guides Association, that our membership has not taken a formal stance on this, but I can reassure you from my discussions with various outfitter members across the state, we would be in full support of the task force's recommendation of increasing license fees for non-residents on elk, deer, and antelope on the special license fee.
Okay. Thank you, Cy. Committee questions for Cy? Yes, Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So, Cy, did you hear any of the discussion on the Big Five amendment?
Yes, I did. And I like the rest of the task force. I think it was an oversight. I think early in the discussions, when we had the discussions about going to 90-10, we were concerned about not cutting income or revenue away from the game and fish. And so I think it was an oversight that we did not tackle a license fee increase on the Big Five so that the department didn't see a decline in revenue on those species. So I would agree that we need to look at that at our next meeting.
Follow up?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So if this committee decided to move an amendment and that was successful, do you feel that it inhibit in any way the discussion with the task force?
Cy?
I think it would be welcome, and my gut tells me that the task force would pass that recommendation through fairly substantially. I know the industry would for sure support it.
But do know too, though, that the task force, as Chairman Ellis alluded to, we've relied heavily on public comment with any of our decisions. And so it would be very important that we do get that public comment. If this committee were to decide to move that amendment forward, it would be imperative that the task force hear from the public with regard to that in order to be able to get behind it or not. So, further questions of Mr. Gilliland? Cy, thank you. Appreciate you taking the time to give us a call.
Thank you.
And if Mr. Shaw could please join us? Is he there?
I promoted it. Oh, here he is.
Mr. Shaw, have you got your video, turn your video and your audio on? There you are. And your audio? You're still muted.
There we go. Sorry.
It's all right. Welcome. Please introduce yourself to the committee.
Okay. Rob Shaw, Hoback, Wyoming. I'm the founder and president of Mountain Pursuit. Thank you for listening to me this morning. I sent an email to all of you last night concerning this license fee increase. And we certainly are in favor of increasing the license fees. This proposal by the task force, we believe is too narrow. As Senator Hicks described this morning, or just a little bit ago, we'd like to see it expanded to all of the species for non-resident tags. But also, not only are those types of categories, including non-resident prices for cow elk, doe antelope, and et cetera, up and down the chain. And secondly, it's not adaptable. In other words, as licenses continue to increase or decrease, the legislature will have to act again. This is just a one-time increase. We suggest indexing this to what is going on in the other states and indexing Wyoming's prices based on what other states are charging and having that updated annually. From our perspective, that would just be a one-time change, a one-time bill in the legislature, and then you wouldn't have to deal with it again. I did send that email out this morning. I don't know if all of you had a chance to read it, but I'd be happy to stand for any questions if there are any questions for me about that right now.
Okay, thank you. Committee, questions for Mr. Shaw? Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Shaw. I did see the email from last night, didn't have a chance to really study it, but one of my questions to you on the indexing, totally get it and totally understand, but my limited time in the legislature, we looked probably 4 years ago at fee increases, and that was a heavy lift at that point in time. Then I'll also refer to the gasoline tax. We tried to index that, as you're suggesting, and that went nowhere in discussion. There were various reasons, but I see the indexing. I think it's a great idea, but I don't see it having any chances of passing. Legislature seems to want more control. I prefer part of that control go to the commission, but I don't see it's got a chance in passing. So,
Committee, further questions for Mr. Shaw? We appreciate your email, Mr. Shaw, and don't disagree with your thoughts. And it does open another question in terms of raising all the non-resident fees. So, and again, this expands the conversation even more. Did you have further comments?
No, not on this, Madam Chair. My email, I think, kind of lays out the general ideas. Again, the beauty of indexing would be it would be adaptable. It would never come back to this legislature. It could be done every year. And if prices went down, the Wyoming's prices would go down accordingly. In other words, the prices that we'd be charging for tags would follow the market. If I could just comment a little bit about the previous discussion on migration corridors. I think before we here in Wyoming start breaking our arms, patting ourselves on the back for migration corridors, there are two corridors, Wyoming range migration corridor and the Pronghorn corridor, where all the work, all the mapping, everything done 4 years ago, and the governor still hasn't designated those migration corridors. And I believe there are two, say that we're doing a lot of migration corridors just isn't accurate. I mean, that's been lingering for 4 years now. We actually sued the governor over that. We got dismissed for standing in the court.
Madam Co-Chair, I think we're straying a little off topic here.
Doing more in terms of migration corridors.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Madam Chairman, did you have a question?
Madam Co-Chair, I was just expressing concern. We're trying to work the bill, and I thought we were straying a little off topic talking about migration corridors. But I did have a question for Mr. Shaw along the lines, and I haven't had a chance to read your email. Do you support indexing then for resident licenses as well?
Mr. Shaw.
Absolutely. If you look at the last part of the email, I break down the current resident prices in Wyoming compared to other states. And we're right in line. The last page of the email kind of shows that we're not undercharging right now for what other states are doing, but that would be another option to do. And I did it for the 4 neighboring states, Utah, Idaho, Colorado, and Montana. We could definitely index Wyoming's resident prices to that. And I think that there will be, I haven't heard that on this committee today, but a lot of times you'll hear from resident hunters that, they oppose resident price increases. And we certainly don't. I think a lot of resident hunters who care about wildlife understand the hell of a deal we get with our license fees. But that would be something that would be absolutely, I think, appropriate in this case. And right now, we're not out of line just about what other states are charging for resident CAGs.
Thank you. Committee, further questions for Mr. Shaw? Thank you. Oh, yes, Vice Chairman Schuler.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just one last comment on this, the indexing. The big downside to me, I think you mentioned in your email, was the fact that this would take extra staff at the Game and Fish to be able to do at least the first index, and I don't know if they would have to be permanent to continue to do that. And so I see that as a downside really to, even though I think that the indexing makes some sense. And I'm one of those that I don't like to see us, increase staffing if we can help. So how else could we do this approach without having to increase staff, or do you have an idea on that?
Mr. Shaw?
Senator Schuler, I think you just misunderstood my note there. I think it would take 2 people a couple of days to do this. That's it. I mean, I worked on this, Senator Hicks did it himself. I did this myself. This is not going to take a lot of time from a Game and Fish perspective. I certainly don't think they would need to hire any extra people. And in terms of the revenue it generate for the department, just from Senator Hicks' bill in 2000, I think, just for, Deer Elk and Antelope, we were looking at, 8 million plus revenue for the department every year annually. So I think it'd be time well spent on the department's side. And again, I think that doing it the first time would be time intensive, but you wouldn't have to do it again unless other states increase their prices or fees. So I think it would be the first one to be a little bit of lift, but it wouldn't be dramatic. And after that, I think it would roll along by itself fairly easily.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Appreciate you taking the time to call into the committee today. And thank you for your email as well. Further public testimony? Is there anybody else online? No? Nobody else in the room? With that, public testimony is closed. Committee, what is your pleasure?
Move the bill.
It's been moved by Newsom, seconded by Landon. So let us walk through the bill. And at this time, we need to address Senator Hicks's proposed amendment. I would just offer this as a suggestion to the committee. I do think that that Senator Hicks's amendment is a good one. I think that we have a perfect opportunity with this bill to increase these non-resident fees. But again, I think too, we ought to be looking at all non-resident fees. And so my question to the committee is, rather than attaching the amendment today, would you be more interested in the Wildlife Task Force addressing this issue at the November meeting to not only look at Senator Hicks's amendment, but to roll in other non-resident fees for other species, and then perhaps come to the general session and this committee with an amendment if we move this bill forward? That's my thought and a suggestion. Or we could just stick with Senator Hicks's proposed amendment at this time and then wait and hear from the task force in the general session as well. Committee, your thoughts? Chairman.
Madam Co-Chair, I'm just looking at it. There are a number of Romanettes. I think we get up to, what, almost 40? I start losing track after 38, 39,
yeah.
40, 41, 42, 43. There are 43 different, more, 46. I, would rather since we're trying to do this in a thoughtful manner, wait to see if the task force would look at the entirety of subparagraph J and come up with a recommendation based off that, rather than us trying to create a placeholder.
Committee, your thoughts? Representative Sweeney?
Madam Chairman, I appreciate going back to the task force, but I think if we overcomplicate it I didn't realize there were that many non-resident. Is that?
Just for clarification, that list includes resident black bear, for example, non-resident black bear. And then some of these include non-resident youth game bird, small game licenses. So it's not, I can't tell you, it's a lot of species, but also resident, non-resident, and then youth licenses.
So thank you for that clarification. I guess in my mind, we're talking about big game, not that bear shouldn't be included in that, but in this discussion, I think Senator Hicks's recommendation on amendment, I would urge us to move forward with that. That doesn't preclude the task force hearing public comment on that at all. And if there's further discussion in the next legislature, this can be amended. But I would think we'd be better off, this committee, being it's our last meeting, including Senator Hicks's thought process at this point in time.
Okay, is that a motion?
That is a motion.
Okay, do I have a second? Second, okay. So we have a motion to amend in the inclusion of the top 5, which, as you know, is sheep, moose, bison, bear, and goat. And so it would be cleaner, it would just amend those top 5 species. And is everybody clear? Senator Guru.
Just a question, Madam Chair. I mean, I liked your idea, but then I heard Senator Ellis, could get a little unwieldy. If we approve this motion, and that's why I seconded to discuss this, that we approve this motion and move these fees, as Senator Hicks puts out, that would not preclude the task force from taking public comment on that move, plus any other move it chose to do, that we could amend, we could strip this out if it was massively not thought well of, or we could add more if the task force came up and said that's what we should be doing, or at least if that, depending on what they're, is that true?
Absolutely, right.
Okay.
No,
Just wanted to make sure. Okay,
that's a good
thank you.
point. Further comment on the amendment?
Madam
Yes, ma'am.
Co-Chair, what are the amounts? I don't think the amendment's clear for me.
Okay. So, and this would be under paragraph J, moving down the line. First one I see is bighorn sheep, non-resident, presently would be 2,318. And Senator Hicks, thank you for joining us. I have a question for you. What was your proposed increase on the big 5?
So, Madam Chair, if you go to the bottom line and you look at those bold for sheep would be $3,000.
And is that on your spreadsheet that you gave us?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then if you look at moose, it'd be $2,750. Mountain goat would be $2,750. Bison would be $6,000. There's nothing on here for grizzlies right now, for grizzly bear, as far as a west-wide analysis, because we don't hunt grizzly bears, but it is in our statutory construct. And I just looked at, there's only really 2 places in North America where you can hunt grizzly bears now, and that's the Yukon and Alaska. Even in British Columbia, they've been currently stay on hunting them. And so those are the only places a normal grizzly bear hunt, because in both of those localities, you have to hire an outfitter. They're $15,000 to $25,000. So tremendously expensive. And so other than our guide rule, you wouldn't necessarily have to hire an outfitter. I think our current price is underpriced. Probably should, if we ever hunt. So, this is not something that, whether we change it or not, but it is currently way underneath the market of what it would cost as a non-resident to go hunt a grizzly bear in either the Yukon or Alaska.
So presently, Senator, it's 6,000. So Chairman Ellis, do you have a proposed suggestion on what might be a dollar amount on a grizzly hunt if and when that becomes an option in Wyoming?
Madam Co-Chair, I would think, I'm just going to throw this out there as an idea. So like looking at sheep, the number is $2,318 currently in statute. What if we were to amend this bill to increase it by $1? So it's a placeholder to allow the task force to better refine those numbers?
You mean for each one of the big five?
Yeah. In this draft, it would just increase it by $1. And then we could let the task force get there and do their work and come up with better numbers for us when the session hits. I don't like that approach generally, but I think that might be a way of not forcing a presumed number. I know you've worked these numbers and these averages, but I think for the group I want the group to get there, not, we've already got these numbers. Now you work from what we've already adopted.
So, Madam Chair, at this point in time, this will be the bill, right? So it would require an amendment in a committee to do this. And so you could also say that the 3,000 for sheep is a placeholder, right?
You could, with
The task
existing
force can
numbers,
come back.
yeah.
So, this is a market-based approach. It's really up to what the committee would like to do, but it's if we put $1 in there, I can reassure you, if there's a recommendation that comes out of the task force, it's not going to be $1.
Well, Senator Hicks,
And so
Madam Co-Chair, I
the task
appreciate.
force has the ability to adjust that to whatever they feel is reasonable, but I would think that the 3,000, the 2,750, those are more reasonable as to what the task force might come up with. And they may just land there. I mean, this would be our starting point for discussion.
Okay.
So, Madam Co-Chair, I think the point I'm trying to get after, though, is if we pick that number, then we're telling you guys, the task force, to start basing it off that number. What if we pick $10,000? What if we pick 15? Then we're communicating to the task force, we want that number to be really, really high. I think what I prefer and what I've enjoyed is you have a whole bunch of experts and really smart people coming together to determine what your recommendations are. And I like that interaction, that public comment. So that's why I don't think that we would open up this statute to increase it by $1. I guess my concern is that we're adopting legislation that'll be ready for the session based on a promise that the task force will come up with a number. We've heard from members saying that they'll likely get there, but there's no assurance. Like this bill where you guys came to us and said, these are the numbers. So I think that's what I'm trying to get after, Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, and I appreciate that. And just knowing the makeup of the task force, I'm pretty sure that they're not going to be biased by anything that the committee at this point says. They're going to make an independent decision. It's a pretty strong-minded group of individuals. And so, again, it really doesn't matter, other than I would believe this would be closer to where we are. So if we do something different, just pick a number.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I mean, that's why I said, how about $1 more? That's a number I picked today based off of no scientific market-based analysis, no analysis, so.
Well, rather than if you would like to make a friendly amendment to the amendment, you can do that. Otherwise, I think the question is grizzly bear. I mean, we've got these dollars, the dollar amounts proposed by Senator Hicks's amendment are in his handout, but we do have a question with regard to the fifth component of the top 5 species. So Representative Sweeney, it's your motion. Do you have suggested dollar a price for grizzly bear non-resident?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So I would look to the good senator if he's
He
got,
did make some suggestions, so let's say
Madam Chair,
20,000?
I think $7,500.
7,500, okay. Work for you?
yes.
All right. So is everybody clear on the proposed amendment, on the proposed fee increases? No, okay. Did you say something? Did somebody say something? Yes.
Madam Chairman, just a quick question for the senator. When you get an opportunity, could you email this to us since we're sharing a copy? I would like it to have a copy myself if that's possible.
Madam Chair, I can forward that on to the committee for electronic version, which
Okay.
has actually got the lines in it.
All right.
So
An
to address
updated-
Senator Ellis's concerns.
Updated version. All right, so if I'm, just to be clear for the committee, so the amendment would be to roll in the top 5 species, and so then the non-resident fee for the following would be sheep, based on Senator Hicks's suggestion, would be $3,000. Moose, $2,750. Goat, $2,750. Bison, $6,000, and then grizzly bear, $7,000. 7,500 rather. Senator Landon.
Madam Chairman, thank you for that clarification. Where are we, what is the fee now? I don't have this in front of me, and that's my only hesitation. I appreciate Senator Hicks bringing this to us, but it's a little hard to do this on the fly. And this is a pretty substantial amendment. And so therein lies my reluctance. I'm trying to get there. But let's just bear in mind what the co-chairman has just gotten done telling us, which is this is a bill that we're preparing to go to session with, regardless of what we put in there. And I hesitate to put a bill to the session that's not as good as we can make it. So
Okay.
I'm just trying to get there. What are the fees now? That would help me. We're jumping it from what to what on these big 5?
Jennifer, I see you've joined us. Would you, from the agency's perspective, could you please provide some clarity to the committee on the amendment?
Madam Chair, Senator Landon, the current fees for non-resident for bighorn sheep are $2,318. For moose, they're $1,980. For mountain goat, they're $2,160. And for wild bison, they're $4,400. And I believe, as previously mentioned, grizzly bear is $6,000. I'm not certain on that one.
It is. Okay, we have an amendment. We have further discussion. Another question, Vice Chairman?
So as far as the wild bison, it seems in my cursory reading of the statutes that bulls and cows and calves are licensed differently, and they're licensed within a different section of section 23-107 instead of the section that we're talking about here. So I think that in the amendment, we would need to change those fees, not in this section J, but in the wild bison statutes. And only for bulls, or would we adjust cows and calves as well?
Vice Chairman Newsom, you're absolutely right. Senator Hicks? do you have
Yeah, that's correct. And this would be only for any wild bison tag, again, specific to that.
Further discussion or comment on the amendment?
Madam Co-Chair?
Yes, ma'am.
I am trying to sort this through, because it says a non-resident applicant shall pay a license fee of $4,400 for a license to harvest any wild bison, or $2,750 for a license to harvest a female or calf wild bison. So what do we need to change our recommendation then on the 2,750? What's that number?
Madam Chairman, there is
Senator
no
Hicks.
recommendation. It would not change for female or calf wild bison.
So we would have to clarify in the amendment then that it would be for bulls only.
Any wild license
Any wild bison, bull,
pursuant to statutes, that's the way it's worded, right?
okay? Senator Landon.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So since I have the department here, are you comfortable with this blanket amendment? And does it get the job done? That's my only concern, is that we're considering an amendment on the fly here that does or does not pertain to a whole lot of paragraphs in our statute. So are we doing more harm than good? Or if we pass this amendment, is the department good with this?
We'll allow the deputy director to step forward and provide comment. Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer.
Chairwoman Flitner, Senator Landon, thank you for that question. If we just go for any bison and any species like Senator Hicks has proposed, we should be covered in this chapter.
Madam Chairman, so are we good on, I think this amounts to anywhere from a 25 to a 40, 50% increase on these out-of-state licenses on these big five. Are we good with sheep and moose and goat?
Deputy.
With this amendment, have we covered what we need to cover on behalf of the department?
Chairwoman Flitner, I think I'd refer to Senator Hicks for his goal and objectives for this increase. As far as the legality of it in the chapter, yes. But I'm not sure if I understand your question entirely.
My apologies, Madam Chairman. So it's more of a functionality consideration that I just want to have some assurances that we're covering the bases here. If does this hit where we need it to hit? If we're going to increase these, does it go far enough? Have we touched everything that you would have a concern over? We've got cows versus bulls in some of our statutes. We've got different things to consider. Are we okay with this amendment?
Greg, go ahead.
Madam Chairman, Senator Landon, I really think there's two sides, of this as you work to assess risk. This has been talked about for a number of years in many legislative sessions, in my almost 5-year tenure here. The task force has talked about the issues surrounding, the big five, and they did put that up. And there are, as Mr. Coursey mentioned, hey, we should have put the fees in there. It was probably an oversight. So I think generally from the department's perspective, a non-resident fee increase across the big five is probably not a bad thing. But to fully answer your question, I really think that, hey, do we have all the I's dotted and all the T's crossed from the department perspective? I think, maybe you kick it back to the task force. They hit that in November. We go through all the I's, all the T's, and then bring it back.
Thank you.
Okay, Madam Chairman, that helps. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, if I
guess
may
we
just
will
give a
hear
little
about
bit
it
of.
in November. If we missed something, then maybe the task force can come back to us.
Okay.
So, Madam Chairman,
Senator
just
Hicks.
for the committee's edification, as this is not a new number, I did consult with the director last night. He seemed to think it was okay, predicated on these numbers were in a bill that I brought 2 years ago, that these exact same numbers, that the department did an enormous amount of work analyzing, what that did, how much did it generate, all of these components and stuff. So the department has seen this for a number of years, looked at that these numbers are not dissimilar to what was in the 2020 bill and the 2019 bills that I brought before the legislature, that the department did a rigorous analysis on at that point in time. And I think that was predicated the discussion that I had with the director that those numbers seemed reasonable. Again, back to the entire discussion that we had about market-based approach associated with those other states. What are we selling in Wyoming relative to those other states? And so this number has been floated for a number of years that the department's had an opportunity to look at. So again, I do believe that going back to the task force, whether the committee adopts this and the exact numbers or not, is something that the task force is going to take up. You've got 5 out of the 20 members of the task force here today. So we can strip it out or we can put it in. I'm just cognizant of the fact that this is the last time this committee meets. It will be a different committee next time, and the closer this bill looks like to a final product, the better it is to start the session and
Right.
have
Senator
coming
Hicks.
in with a whole big amendment to the bill.
Exactly. Yeah, you make a very good point. Committee? Yes, Senator Guru.
I just had a question if you'd ask the staff how they, if it tracks in for what they're looking for.
Okay. Luke,
Okay.
did you hear Senator Guru's question?
I think I may have missed a little part of it. I'm sorry, what was that, Senator?
No,
Madam
just-
Chairman.
I mean, Luke, no, just to make sure that you're okay as far as the different sections and make sure that you're pulling that out and tracking it okay, and are we in good shape with that?
Madam Chairwoman, and Senator Guru, yes, I think I am tracking along. I believe for sheep, moose, goat, and bison, those license fees are currently in 23-2101J. And then, yes, the bison licenses are specifically in 23-2107. I think those are the primary changes. I would need to do a little more thorough look to make sure that if there was any other conforming amendments to go along with that, but I think I'm tracking along.
You bet. Thank you for the clarification. Appreciate that. Thank you, Luke. All right. If there is no further discussion or comment, all those in favor of the motion on the floor, please show by show of hands. 2, 3, 4. Okay. Motion dies for lack. But Senator Hicks, I appreciate your bringing this forward, and thanks for your time. Thanks for the discussion. Thanks to the department. Say we are back on the bill.
Madam Co-Chair?
Yes, ma'am.
Madam Co-Chair, just before we leave that discussion, I think if the task force wants to look at the non-resident license fees in paragraph J and beyond, paragraph E, I think deals with the bison. Maybe it's worth looking at all of them, all the birds, all the turkey, non-resident, just to make sure those are at market. Maybe that's its own bill. Maybe it's an amendment, I don't know, but I was just nervous about moving this on the fly.
Chairman Corsi, did you hear the thoughts of the good chairman?
Yes, Madam Chair, I did, and we will add that to our agenda for November 18th.
Very good. Thank you. And thank you again for being here. Again, committee, we're back on the bill. Is there further discussion? Senator Landon.
Madam Chair, just a final thought regarding, the amendment that we just dealt with, and really appreciate Senator Hicks suggesting that this needed to happen. I'm going to feel a lot more comfortable. Throughout this whole process, we have relied on our Wildlife Task Force and the great work that they've done. And I think this is going to be a little bit better solution to the addition to this bill. Let's go through the task force. Let's get that recommendation back. I don't have any doubt that we can work this bill in the session and incorporate that, but I would prefer that we're able to tell our colleagues that, look, we took direction from the task force. And so that was the basis of my reluctance. I plan to support it in the session. I just want to be sure that we've hit all the bases. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Landon. I appreciate your comments, and I do not disagree. Thank you.
Madam Chairman.
Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So would any of the members feel comfortable with Co-Chairman Ellis's thought process on plus $1 in the amendment? Or I don't want to beat a dead horse. I mean, if we lost, we lost. So
I think we'll just proceed.
Yeah, Madam Co-Chair, I still have one more amendment to
Okay.
offer.
Yes, what page?
Page 3, starting on line 16, how about just the regular, inserting regular standard language that this act shall take effect not later than January 1st, 2024, or whatever the standard language is, and then strike section 3 and strike section 4, or, and then onto the, and strike section 3, which goes on to page 4.
Okay, I second that. Everybody clear on the proposed amendment? Okay, all those in favor, please show by a raise of hands. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, for any further amendments? Any further discussion? All right, please call the roll.
This is a roll call vote for 23 LSO 317, non-resident hunting license application fees. Senator Guru.
Aye.
Senator Landon. Senator Salazar. Senator Schuler. Representative Banks.
Aye.
Representative Haroldson.
No.
Representative Jennings. Representative Knapp.
No.
Representative Newsom.
Aye.
Representative Sweeney.
Aye.
Representative Williams left a proxy vote of aye. Representative Winter. Chairman Flitner.
Aye.
Co-Chairman Ellis.
Aye.
10 ayes.
Okay, thank you, committee. Thank you for your work. Game and Fish, thank you. Senator Hicks, thank you so very much. Appreciate all the time you gave this committee this morning. Chairman Livingston, you as well. Chairman Corsi, thank you. Appreciate it. With that, committee, let's take, we're back in at 11 with our next agenda item. So let's take about a little less than a 15-minute break. Thank you. We are back in session, and we have before us now our next agenda item, the Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust Fund update from Executive Director Bob Budd. And Director Budd has provided us with a handout. The floor is yours, sir.
Madam Chair, thank you. I put together a PowerPoint. We'll go through that relatively quickly. We do this about every 2 years because there are new people on the committee who have not been familiar with what the trust does, and I appreciate the opportunity to do that. The trust was established in 2005 by the Wyoming legislature. It's funded by appropriation, interest, and donations. Largely appropriation. You'll all recall that $75 million was added to the corpus of the trust account last year, which brought us to $190 million. The original goal was to have $200 million, a minimum of $200 million in the trust account, so we're very close to that. The intent was to generate between $8 and $10 million per year for projects. And that actually is probably less than what we could do. The board's pretty diligent, however, about not, they're pretty frugal about what you do and making sure that that money goes a long ways. We have a 9-member board. They're appointed by the governor and all are confirmed by the Senate. The interests by statute include a variety of backgrounds: local government, oil and gas, agriculture, recreation, tourism, mining, and others. Originally, they were 3-year terms, reappointable. We immediately figured out that created some problems. You could have so much turnover that you couldn't maintain the continuity. And it's important to probably point out that we have a staff of 2 and 9 board members, and that's who does all of our work. So the board members are volunteer and they actually get out on the ground. Some of you have been out with them. They meet 6 times annually and they're appointed from appointment districts, or judicial districts, I'm sorry. Just real quickly, our board members currently, Kim Floyd from Cheyenne is our chairman. He was an original member in '05. Christy Haswell from Sheridan represents Johnson and Sheridan counties. Steve Meadows is our vice chair, another original member from Jackson, Teton, Fremont, and Sublette counties. Don Schramm from Rock Springs is Lincoln, Sweetwater, and Uinta. Esther Wagner Casper is Natrona County. Mike Massey in Laramie is Carbon and Albany. Mike was actually one of the co-sponsors of the original bill that created the trust when he was in the Senate. Jacqueline Downey from Moorcroft does the northeast corner. Ken Bannister from Torrington has Platte, Goshen, Niobrara, and Converse counties. And then Pidge Fulton from Powell is Park Bighorn, the Bighorn Basin. Just so it gives you a flavor for what they are, Pidge is a farmer. Ken Bannister is a retired psychologist, worked in the education system. Jacqueline is a biologist, avian biologist that works up there, and she and her husband also have a ranch. Esther Wagner worked for years in the oil and gas industry and is back in the oil and gas industry. Christy is a former consultant. She's also a county commissioner, so we have county government represented. Steve is a hotel owner, so the tourism industry is represented there. Don Schramm is an engineer and a former BLM employee. And I left, who did I leave out? Did I get them all? Oh, Kim Floyd is outfitter, guide, avid outdoorsman, and so we have the full gamut. It's a dynamic group, so that makes it interesting. The board has a very broad mandate to enhance wildlife habitat and natural resources, and I would accentuate natural resources. That the original bill said only wildlife. As it went through the process, other things, that's erosion control, it's water quality, those kind of things fit into what the board does. You can see and it's in your handout, I won't read all of those, that it's a very broad mandate. It ranges from everything. We rebuild rivers, we put in wetlands, we do conservation easements, we do rangeland restoration, prescribed fire, aspen treatments. Migration more recently has been a big thing. Obviously, we've got a lot of that on the agenda as we move forward, but it's a very, very broad mandate, and it includes things like mitigation and dealing with conflicts between wildlife and disease, all those different things. So we also have other capacities. We serve as a bank. We're handling the funds for the mitigation of the transmission line that's associated with wind development in Wyoming. So Gateway South and Gateway West, we'll handle that. The funds for that will also serve on the selection committee for projects. We've done specific things largely at the request of the legislature. That includes the bark beetle outbreak in northeast Wyoming. We put a considerable amount of money into putting an end to that, actually saving a whole lot of that forest resource up there. Post-fire rehab, that's another one. We had some significant fire impacts down here in this part of the state. Those are things that we've bailed into. But the point there is that emerging challenges, whether it's invasive aquatic invasives or something like that, we can address those very quickly. We grant money twice a year. So if something comes in isn't quite ready, the goal of the board is to make it ready, and we'll sit down, work with them, go through their design. I was just talking with Representative Larson as I walked over today, and we're working on a project in Lander that is pretty critical. And it's partly a river project, partly a road project, partly an irrigation project and so we are already working on that in preparation for that getting done. We can't do four things. We can't buy land, we can't buy water rights, we can't introduce endangered species, and we can't require public access. Outside of that, the palette is open for whatever is needed to be painted. The application process, I'll go through these really quickly. You can submit year-round. We help with design. We help with getting people finding other sources of money. We have two funding periods. One is in the spring and one is in the fall. We grant money in June and December. And so anything that we grant that is over $200,000 right now has to come to the legislature. So you'll see most of the smaller grants come in the spring period, then the bigger ones come in the fall because they know they have to go through that process. We do preliminary review. Every board member reads every application and ranks at 1, 2, or 3. Then the low being the better, the high being the less desirable. Those then get ranked in that order, and that's how they're considered. And that goes back to when we started. We did not have nearly enough money to cover the demand. So you wanted to get the ones everybody agreed on, work those first. Now then, that's followed by site visits in the field. We go out, we look at their financials, we look at their matching funds, we look at their engineering, we look at their design, their partnerships. All of that factors into the final ranking. And then the board will approve as they go each of those different funding periods. This is the spreadsheet. I'm not going to get into the weeds there, but it's an interactive spreadsheet that goes through all of the different criteria that we would look for in a project. It's in your packet. If you're interested in looking at that, I'd be happy to send it to you as well. But you end up with a total score, and that's a gut check for the board. They've done it enough now that they can do that in their head, and they don't just go through and fill it out. But when we get new members, we actually ask them to do that, and I go up and work with them on site visits so that they have a sense of all of the scope of what a project might do. The site visit process is probably unique to the Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust. Most grant programs, you write a grant, people review it, and they say, I like it or I don't like it. In our case, we get out on the ground. This is a bark beetle project that we did in northeast Wyoming, and we're out there looking at, you can see the stain in that particular log that he's showing. We do at least 2 people go on every one of those site visits. Some we have more. And site visits are actually incredibly insightful. We did one in Du Bois, Senator, I think you can recall this. We had over 40 people there. We had the town council, we had the mayor, we had the fire department, we had the legislature, we had the local community, and it was to build a pond, which is in Du Bois, and is a fantastic project. But people get really interested, and they're very vested in what the outcomes are. Again, we'll do about 80 site visits a year in all 23 counties. This is one in Sublette County that ended up with a river project that restored fish passage to several hundred miles of that river. We have others that you go out, the big thing to look at, they're not terribly pleasant for the applicant because we do get down into the weeds with their numbers. I mean, we'll say, well, why is this? What's that? We had one where they had actually had factored in the price of donuts, which were removed. We do not pay for donuts. We don't pay for material and equipment. We pay for materials. We don't buy equipment, but it's a pretty in-depth process. This is another one over in Sublette County. This was a site visit, like you can see, that's a about a fourth of the people who went on this site visit. The grants, it's important that you understand that this is a contract for services. It's not a grant where you come in and ask for money and we just send you money and then you do it and tell us what you did. You actually write a contract for what's going to be done, and we don't pay for anything until it's done. There's no money advanced. It's a protection for the state, certainly a protection for those of you in the legislature and for the public, that if you say you're going to do it, you're going to do it. Now, we have the latitude if something comes along where you can't accomplish it the way you originally thought, you can come back and say, hey, we've got to make some adjustments, but that has to be reviewed. And so either I have to sign off on it or we take it back to the board and allow them to do that. An example of that is we had a prescribed burning project in central Wyoming. A wildfire burned part of that. They had the opportunity to move that money to another project and burn some of it, and to use some of that money for post-fire treatment for invasive species. We allowed that. We said, okay, the burn occurred. Now you've got a risk from cheatgrass. We'll go in and treat the cheatgrass so that we actually get the result we wanted from the prescribed fire. I mentioned the large projects, that $200,000 limit. There will be a bill in the next session to raise that. Inflation has made almost any project is $200,000 on our end now. So there'll be a bill from a select committee to move that up to $400,000. But a large project will, by the time we write the contract, will have been reviewed 18 separate times. That's from the first review of my board to the final review of the governor and the auditor 18 times. So it's not like things fall through the cracks here. What are the selection criteria? I'm going to just race through these. You can look at it. It's the habitat and natural resource value is 40%. Cooperation and partnership is 20. That's a big thing. Is everybody who should be involved? In other words, don't bring me a project, Game and Fish Department, if you haven't talked to the landowners. Landowners or BLM, don't bring me a project, a wildlife project, unless you've talked to Game and Fish. And we just assure that that's happened. Then there's financing and permitting is 20%. How many matching funds? We try to be not in more than 50% on anything, try to be around 20. Our leverage currently is between $5 and $7. So for every dollar the state spends on a project, we're generating $5 to $7 from external sources. That may be landowners, it may be conservation districts, it may be NGOs, but it's a phenomenal return on investment. And then permitting is readiness. Is it ready to go? Feasibility and longevity, we don't want to fund things that we have to go back and do every 4 or 5 years. We're looking at 30-year timelines or perpetuity. I highlighted there at the bottom, economic integrity. We've had projects come in where all of the ecological part of it was great, but there's salvage value in the timber. So we'll make them go back and do that at Forest Service, or we'll request they go back and make sure that that salvage value can be incorporated to a local mill or to a local artisan or something like that. Likewise, on range projects, we want to know what the return is to the farmer and rancher. Are they going to get a benefit if we do a project out there that's a water project or a fencing project? Where's the benefit back to those people who are generating income in our local communities? And we like short-term attack strategies. When they come with a project, people will come in and say, this is phase one. They probably won't get funded until we see all the phases and we know what the total of the project looks like. It may be 18 years. Representative Sweeney, we've done one south of Casper that we're now in our 18th year. And it adds to it. Every year you add more, but we knew what the scope of that was going in. So it doesn't bind future boards, future legislatures, or others with an expectation that they're going to be funded. We know what that expectation is. Again, I said we're very flexible. The key to success is communication. That's something that we take very seriously. We want to make sure we're talking all the way through the projects. So where have we gone? We've had 1,400 applications since 2005. We've done over 1,000 grants. We have invested as a state $110 million in our travel, recreation, wildlife, and cultural resource in this state. That has generated over $800 million on the ground. We expect that within the next couple of years, we will pass $1 billion of direct impact, economic impact in our local community. It is a phenomenal boost to a number of entities. An example of that, and I wish Senator Hicks was here to tell you about it, but when the oil boom went away in the Little Snake River Valley, there were a couple of contractors down there that basically were going to lay off their entire crew. They were looking at selling equipment. They were looking at going out of business. They learned how to do river work. They learned how to build wetlands. And the work that we've done down in central Wyoming, they are now leaders in the field of river restoration. They're leaders in the field of wetland creation. They know how to do it and do it well. They never laid a man off. They never took that economic impact out of their community. They just shifted their expertise to another area. We have companies in this state that do nothing but work on these kinds of projects, and they are oversubscribed to where they are now adding equipment and people. So it is a huge economic impact that people don't think about. You know, we think about, yeah, it's important to be able to have blue sky, and it's important to be able to have the vistas that we sell at Diane sells over at Travel. But they don't think about the direct economic impact of doing these kind of things and how that sustains a lot of our smaller communities that don't have a strong tax base, that don't have a lot of diversity in their income. We have projects in every county, and we have over 140 sponsoring organizations. It's everything from local groups to national, international groups that do it. Types of projects, the biggest one is river restoration fish passage projects. Some of you got to go up with us in Hot Springs County in August and look at some of those. They're pretty amazing. You put in a fish ladder. We did one on the Wood River that opened up hundreds of miles of historic spawning habitat for cutthroat trout. Why is that important? It's important because you have these species that are iconic or they're small in population, and it's very easy for someone to come in under the Endangered Species Act and say, well, cutthroat trout can't reach all of their historic spawning range, therefore they're endangered. Now, you all know what an endangered listing does. You start doing it with a fish that lives in half the state, or you start doing it with sage grouse that live in virtually all of the state. When we're able to go in and say, well, actually, no, we have put in fish ladders, we've got bypasses, we've redone our rivers to where that fish passage now goes clear to Yellowstone from Meeteetse or from Grable. That argument doesn't carry water. And we do that, and we're very cognizant of that as these come in. We've done warm water fishery stuff that reaches into the Missouri. So if you're in Buffalo, Clear Creek goes down, you're stocking sturgeon, goldeneye, you're talking other species. That is part of what we do, and that I think that underpins our bottom line as a state and our ability to continue with the economic drivers that we have, and that's critical. Aspen enhancement, aspen habitats are critical habitats. We're losing them in the Rocky Mountains. We have actually added a lot of aspen habitat, hundreds of thousands of acres throughout the state. Conservation easements, you're all familiar with those, and we do probably about 6 to 8 of those a year. Water development for both wildlife and livestock. Invasive species, that one is rising now because of the threat of primarily cheatgrass, but we also do a lot of work on Russian olive, salt cedar, and other species that are destroying things. Rangeland enhancements, that's primarily sagebrush stimulation to deal with the sage grouse issue and mule deer. Wetland development, it's a small percentage, but a huge impact. Wetlands are like the old movie, if you build it, they will come. They do. As soon as they see the water, they're on it. And again, back to the one that Senator Salazar is familiar with, we had quite a go-round about that. They wanted a fish pond. I said, you got to do more for birds. Round and round we went. They finally did it. The first call I got from the Du Bois Anglers and Wildlife Group was, hey, we have trumpeter swans on our pond. And I said, oh, where are they? And they said, they're on your part, that trawl part with no fish. I said, okay, that's good. Fence modification, clearly that's a big issue today with migration. And that's one where you've got willing partners that want to do that. We help with that. Bit of research and inventory, that feeds back into where we put money on the ground. And then other, which primarily now is migration and passage. So overpasses, underpasses, and those kind of things. This is just fun to show people. This is how the world changes as the year goes on. Each of these is a different type of project, and you can see that they'll peak and then they'll fall off and they'll come up and they'll go down. That's driven partly by funding, but it's also driven by what people get as far as expertise. And so you see, as an example, river projects just going way up and continuing to go up. That's because the science caught up with how to do it. They got cheaper, they got more effective, and people said, we understand, you know, if you're doing in one type of a substrate, you're going to use wood, in another you're going to use rock, knowing what to do, mobilizing. We stockpiled rock. We got that from YDOT and an old mine that they said you can have it. So Trout Unlimited stockpiled rock to reduce the cost. Those kind of things are the spin-offs that come from this. Go ahead. Type of projects, as I said, just get a graphic. You can see rivers are the big one. The next one is range now, and then conservation easements, invasives. These will move, rise and fall, but that's kind of where we are presently. By percentage, vastly river projects, again, just the same thing, depicted a different way. And you know, what makes these work? Well, ecological needs. What do we need? What needs to be done out there? Partner capacity. The more partners that we have, the better off we are, the more we can do. Matching funds. We get a lot of matching funds from federal programs, particularly the Natural Resource Conservation Service. Permitting status. Are people ready to go? As we do more, people get better about getting their permits. As an example, Corps of Engineers knows what they are. They can review them that much faster, and we can get stuff done on the ground. Weather, new knowledge, and then partner expertise and where they are. Are they ready to go, or are they ready to be done? The costs vary depending on a lot of factors. This is important, I think, for you to know what kind of work it is. For instance, if you're doing a treatment on aspen, fire is one cost, mechanical is another, and chemical is another. And then you can even break it down mechanical. If you can use equipment, it's cheaper than if you have to hand cut. But whatever the proper, appropriate way to do it is the way we do it. So sometimes you look at it and say, wow, your cost for a helicopter to helicopter log something is exorbitant by the hour. But when you break it down, if you did it by hand, it's about 1/10 of the cost. So you're looking always at where do you get the maximum efficiency. It depends on matching funds. Your leverage decreases with time sometimes. Right now, our leverage is going back up because there's a huge availability of funding to do that. And then the scale of interest is also very important. What happens usually is you find one person says, I'd like to do a project. We had this in the Shirley Basin. They did a project which was an enhancement on range. That led to water development. That led to fence modifications. That led to river restoration, which is now we're looking at a project that will go from the headwaters of the Little Medicine River clear to the town of Medicine Bow. And that whole river will be completely restructured to where it has problems, they'll be addressed. Where it's functioning correctly, we'll maintain that. Economic impacts, there's $315,000 generated for every $100,000 we spend. That's 34.4 job months per $100,000 that the trust spends. And again, we spend about 6 to 8 to 10 million a year, so you can do the math on how many jobs we're talking about. It's 2.9 permanent jobs for every $100,000 the trust spends, and it's a $4 gain for every dollar invested. That number is actually now closer to 6. Our key partners are conservation districts, state agencies. The Game and Fish Department is obviously a major partner, nonprofits, federal agencies, land trusts, and local government. And I'll just go through these real quick, just the types of projects, and you got that in your packet, so you can see what they are, and then we can get to any questions that you may have, just go on through them. I'll back up to that one. That's kind of fun just to tell the story. What you're looking at there, this is up at Lovell. The top picture is before the treatment for salt cedar and Russian olive. The bottom is after it was done. Turkey and deer populations exploded when we got all of these invasives out of there. But the fun part of it is, as they were doing it, they were using a skid steer with a cutter on it to go out and cut these. And they're working their way out. And when people tell you, yeah, these things use water. And everybody goes, yeah, so they use water. Well, all of a sudden the skid steer is out there a quarter mile and the water table is coming up so fast as they're removing it that he starts sinking into the swamp. So they had to get every chain they could find in Bighorn County and borrow some from Park County, take an excavator on the road, hook it to the skid steer and pull it back out of the swamp that was coming up that fast. We had another case where they were cutting south of Casper, and the landowner came up and they were eating lunch by this pretty little stream. And they said, "What do you call this creek?" And he said, "Well, I've lived here 65 years and I've never seen it run water in my life." So as they removed the conifers and prompted the aspens, that stream started flowing again. And as you know, water is a big issue right now at a headwaters state. Anything we can do to generate more water, get water back, that's important. Go ahead. Rangeland enhancements, obvious. River restoration, I've talked enough about that. Wetlands, same thing. And then the other projects, again, migration is the big one right now. So go ahead. Summary, I've already gone through this, 111 million. We've generated over 800 million in economic, and we're at 575 in matching funds. I think the program has probably surpassed the expectations. I know it has from what Governor Friedenthal and the sponsors at the time thought it would do. We're very humble to be able to do this work. It is fabulous work. It engages communities. The last thing I would tell you is people often ask, what's the most gratifying thing about your job? And I will tell you, it's the fact that when we started with these things, people who would not ride in the same cab of a pickup with each other now are walking in together and saying, we've got a project idea and we want to do it. And so you have people who were avowed enemies or who thought they were, that suddenly found that we have tremendous common interests in this state in maintaining the underpinning for everything we believe in, which is our natural resources. And they come together in massive ways. We'll have 30 or 40 different funding organizations on a single project. And it may be 1,000 from one and 500,000 from another. Nobody cares about that. They just all want to make sure it works. And so, Madam Chairman, I appreciate the time. I hope this has been valuable for you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Director Budd. Committee questions for Director Budd? Senator Salazar and then Senator Landon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here today, Ms. Budd. Quick question, what is currently the amount in the fund right now? How much money are you working with as of right now?
Madam Chair, the current balance in the account, well, I have to check with the treasurer because as you know, things kind of go up and down, but the current is 190 million ballpark. So we're going to propose in the next session, just so you're aware, we've already, I've met my budget meeting with the governor, that the board will move $5 million in project money because last year returns were very good into the corpus. And we're asking for a match from the legislature of 5 to bring that to 200. And then at that point, we have the ability, we think, to sustain it and make it inflation proof.
Follow up? Sure.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, so the goal is 200 million. And then help me, what over the next biennium are you looking for from the legislature in any additional revenue?
Madam Chairman, Senator Salazar, we are not looking for any additional from the legislature. The whole point was to get us to the 200. If we can continue to yield between 4 and 6, and as I said, last year it was better than that, but if on average we budget for about 4 to 6, we can meet the demand, most of the demand. Now, where the legislature may have a role, and this is entirely up to you and it will not come from me, is if you see a need, as you have in the past, as an example, to really be aggressive on invasive annual grasses. And as you know, in northern Wyoming, we had a pretty scary shot coming in from 2 particular invasive annual grasses. You allocated as a legislature additional funds specific to that purpose. In the last session, you allocated funding $10 million to match federal funding on a 4-to-1 basis for highway crossings. And so there are 3 projects on the docket that we're trying to get the federal funding for, one at Halleck Ridge in Carbon County, one just south of Du Bois, and one over at Kemmer that will address areas where we're killing lots and lots of wildlife. In addition, we're working on one, in fact, I'm leaving tomorrow to go look at Jackson, where they're killing moose. And that one would be additional underpasses there, again, with huge leverage. When you consider that 10 million will be matched 4 or 5 to 1, we're getting a lot of work done for a relatively reasonable fee. Yeah.
Thank you, Senator. Nope, you're good. Committee, further questions for Director Bud? I had a question. How is the trust available to help with the assault on the aquatic invasive species? Does that fit into your goals?
Madam Chair, yes, I think the trust could do that. To date, we have not. There have been other sources of funding, and Game and Fish has handled that extremely well. As you know, we've had a discovery of a Chinese mollusk or a snail in Glendo this year. So probably it would be reasonable to assume that if we come up with a treatment strategy for that, that would be a project that the Wildlife Trust would probably have a dog in that fight, along with Homeland Security, along with Game and Fish, along with water development. I mean, these are not just a wildlife issue, but what we do, and I appreciate the question because it gives me a chance to tell you, what we do is we'll look at a project, like we just looked at one this year, that is an irrigation restructure. The irrigation system works okay. It could be a lot better. It could be more efficient. We could save water. There's also a fish passage piece that connected to that. So what we did is we broke down the total cost of that project. How much of that is the wildlife piece? That's what we're willing to invest in. The rest of it, water development will pick up, or the local irrigation district will pick up. And so you'll do a $20 million project. We may have 1.2 million in it. Same thing with the project I mentioned at Jackson, the underpass. There's a highway resurfacing going on and a bridge being built. That's YDOT's dominion. But when it comes to those underpasses and that passage, that's where we come in and play our role. So we'll probably have $3.7 million total on the crossing piece, the bulk of that paid for by Teton County. But then also NGOs like Mr. Corsi's group, the Muley Fanatics, and others who contribute, and the trust will contribute, and we'll take care of the part that relates to the wildlife piece. It's beautiful because it allows us to do things any one of us could not do if it weren't for the other. And so by working together, we can do these big, really, really cool projects and do them right.
I had another question too about the banking piece. Can you go back to that, beginning of your presentation? How did that come to play?
Madam Chair, at the time that the trust was created in '05, the Jonah Field was just being developed, and they were calling for compensatory mitigation, and they created a fund. At the time, Governor Freudenthal said that fund needs to be held by an independent party, which was the trust. So we manage the funds for that. The most recently with Gateway West and Gateway South, the same thing held true. The BLM could not hold those funds and administer them. So they came to us and said, would you do it? And we set up a process whereby, yes, we sent out the request for proposals, went out to locally, and here's where the area that could be considered. Those will come in the 1st of December, and then a group of people will evaluate those and determine which ones should be funded. It isn't something that we do a lot of, but we do it in cases where it makes sense and where it's primarily a wildlife. Now, if there was a mitigation project that was different, had other components, probably we would not be a part of that. So I guess in fairness, Chairman Flitner, they're all one-offs. They're evaluated. My board looks at them. We run them through the governor's office. We run them through the select committee and others and say, is this something we should do? And to date, we've done 3 of those.
Fascinating. Committee, yes, Representative Haroldson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Director, obviously. Thanks for the instruction on this. Had a conversation with you last year. You're like, you don't understand what this program's doing. And so thank you for the information on that. With that, I guess a question kind of tying back into what we talked about earlier. I don't know if you were in here, but with CWD and what it's doing, is there an aspect we can bring in this side where maybe we could help mitigate some of that exposure and stuff? Have you guys kind of put your thinking caps on in CWD and what you guys could do to help us in that?
Madam Chair, Representative Haroldson, yes. In fact, our meeting in June was in Douglas, and we had a long conversation about that. That was followed up by a presentation on CWD at our meeting in Thermopolis with the Select Committee. Chronic wasting disease may or may not be a habitat-driven factor. It depends a lot on whether, and let's just take deer, on whether or not they migrate, whether or not they're local, and understanding that we may have a role, and this is where we're working with Game and Fish on. Where is the role of the trust in modifying habitat to where we can minimize the potential for CWD? I don't think we know that answer yet. It's a different thing than it is with some others. As an example, as an aside, that Dr. Monteith came and presented to the group in Thermopolis. If you're looking at nutrition based, that's totally habitat driven. That may be lack of fire, it may be too many animals, it may be any number of things, wrong species, invasives. Those are things that we have an immediate nexus with, and we're doing all over the state. Chronic wasting is a little different because it's transmitted animal to animal, and is that something that you can modify with habitat modification? If it is, absolutely, we would be right at the front of it. We would be right where we are with the nutrition pieces on bighorn sheep and on deer and on some of those things. So the answer is, I think we're waiting to see. One thing we do know is that if we can keep our habitats in optimal condition, which does not necessarily mean climax condition, it means that, there's disturbance out there. If we can keep them vibrant, if we can keep them resilient, a lot of these other issues become secondary.
Committee, further questions? Yes, Vice Chairman Schuler, and then Chairman Ellis, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a question on, I was interested in the private donations. I wondered if those are more corporate types of donations or nonprofits, or where do those come from? And maybe how much do you get annually?
Madam Chairman, Senator Schuler, we don't go after those. That was early on, there was a lot of talk about, well, you should go out and talk to foundations and do all these things. We get everything. We had a high school class in Douglas gave us a donation, $180 in memory of their teacher who died. We had $500,000 from Shell Oil to implement a project in western Wyoming to benefit mule deer and sage grouse that they wanted to put in, but they wanted someone to manage it. So we did that, and we matched part of that money. The reason we don't go after private foundation money is that we require a match from all of our partners. And if we go out and get $1 million from X charity or X foundation, that's $1 million that doesn't go to Trout Unlimited or to Muley Fanatics or to somebody that we really need to work with. So what we do when we get a lot of those, we do get people who ask. We refer them. I just had one this year. Somebody came in and said, here's what we want to accomplish. Will you take it? And I said, no, but here is somebody that fits you perfectly. And so we move them to those other NGOs that then that money comes back in match to us, but we're not administering it and we're not taking it from our partners. So it's a minimal amount. Of the total 190 million, I think about 3.5 has been from private contributions.
Very good. Chairman Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Budd. I just wanted to ask about endangered species, because I think we always talk about sage grouse, which is fine and fair, but I'm just wondering how you get ahead of identifying those issues that might be on the horizon. And I say this with all sensitivity because we don't want to sound the alarm bells, and now groups will start saying, oh, that's what they're looking at. So that's my first question. And then the second is just curious, we've been doing a lot of work on our tribal relations committee to make sure that tribes are eligible for funding. And so if you could talk a little bit about whether or not you've had any difficulty through opinions of what your statute says, are you able to award it to tribal entities if they were to request a grant?
Madam Chair, Madam Co-Chair, let me address the second question first. We have done numerous projects on the reservation and with the tribes. Primarily, we do those through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service because that's the agency that works with them on those. And just to show you again how delicate some of these are, if Fish and Wildlife is an applicant to us, we have to pay them overhead, which is like 25%. We have never had an application from Fish and Wildlife because we will not pay them 25%. So what they do is they work with the local conservation district or with an NGO to implement a project, and then we will go in and fund that. So we've done a tremendous amount of wetland work on the reservation. We've done some river restoration work. We've done a lot of fish passage work. I'm actually headed up there tomorrow to look at a project, a rangeland project dealing with feral horses. So they're valuable partners. We've done work, we just did 3 of them 2 years ago that were fence modifications. So they are absolutely a partner. We've never had a problem with that, and we value that relationship very strongly. As it relates to endangered species, we are very fortunate in this state to have the Game and Fish Department that we do. They're not looking backward, they're looking forward. As you know, we have a governor and a legislature that are also looking forward, not backward. We're always looking at species that we have a concern with. In many cases, we're funding research that allows us to understand what that niche that they may fill. If you look at the midget-faded rattlesnake or, the pygmy rabbit or some of those where they just live in one little small place, are we making sure that the place they live has the things they need? And lucky in those 2 cases, what we do for sage grouse actually probably benefits them greatly. Then you look at other species that you're considering, they're kind of in decline or you have concerns about, are we doing things that enhance them? And that ties back into some of the research work we've done, as an example, in the Wyoming range that led to, here's what we need to do. And in that case, it led to invasives control in some cases. It led to prescribed burning in others. It led to mechanical treatment. It led to rangeland enhancements that cross millions of acres. And what you see is then you'll see a bump in the condition of those doe deer. You'll see a bump in the number of fawns that make it through to the next year. You'll see those things happening. And so you're always looking ahead. We're fortunate in this state that we all talk to each other. We're very blessed in the fact that the wildlife advocates do talk to landowners. They do talk to the Game and Fish. They do talk to me. And they'll say, we're worried about this in this location. Then we can put a group of people together to say, okay, well, what do we need to do? So I think we're ahead of the curve most of the time. There are always going to be things that pop up that you don't think about. They're usually very obscure species that somebody says, well, hey, what about the sturgeon? How many people even know we have sturgeon in Wyoming? We do. They're little. They aren't the big ones in the Missouri, but that's where they come from. So I think we're fortunate, as I said, to have a tremendous Game and Fish Department, to have people in this body and in our leadership that are looking ahead and that value our natural resources.
What was that rattlesnake?
The midget faded.
Midget what?
Faded rattlesnake.
Midget faded? Where does he live? I don't
Right
want...
right near Grable and Shell. And they're
Right.
really, there's only like 5 of them left in the world.
That's
They're-
my fear.
Red Desert,
The red desert.
Southern Wyoming.
Midget faded. Okay, that's a new one on me. Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Budd, thanks for all the great information. And the few months that I got to serve with you were some of the most enjoyable times. Really appreciate it. You brought up the feral horse situation, and I saw a presentation from somebody up in Casper and went away fairly alarmed at what the potential is out there for what's going on with horses. Are you seeing a spike in anything coming forward to you on that front? Or do you share any of that alarm, I guess?
Madam Chairman, Senator Landon, I share that alarm completely. And if you get out and see what the impact can be from an overabundance of feral horses, it's devastating. And it is to the resource, to other species and everything. I will tell you, I think there is a heightened awareness right now at the Department of the Interior as to the magnitude of the situation. We do not have it in control. We do not have it in hand. They are getting to where they're at their AML, their allowance in some areas, but it is something we've got to be vigilant on. They'll double their population in 4 years if they're unchecked. And that is a huge impact, particularly on water. And if you look at, some of the areas where these horses are, water is a limiting factor. If they're fouling the water holes and nothing else can use them or they're running them off, that is a direct and devastating impact on this state.
Thank you. Committee, further questions? Yes, Senator Salazar.
Yeah, I failed to mention, Director Bud, you're doing a great job. I really think you are. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator.
I concur, Director Bud, and your presentation was spot on. Appreciate all the work that you've done over the years with this. And I also want to put a plug in for the director. If you're not aware, he is also a writer, and he has a new novel. It is called Otter Dance, and I would suggest that you not walk, but run to pick up a copy or multiple copies for Christmas gifts. Can they buy those locally here, Director Bud?
Well, if you break for lunch, they can walk across the street and get some. But
Okay.
Madam Chair, I appreciate that very much. Correction, it's not a novel, it's essays. It's about
Essays,
Wyoming, it's
okay.
about our state, about our people, and I appreciate that very much.
Well, my mom has already inhaled it, and she gives it 2 thumbs up.
Good deal.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Madam Co-Chair?
Yes.
Just one thing. I am reading the statute that created the trust, and I am reading that the board is supposed to annually come before TRW. And it says the board, but you're the director, so I think that's a fine thing, but maybe we can just make a better effort. I mean, it's in the statute and I like following the rules, so we all need to do a better job to make sure we see from you, or hear from you annually. That's what the statute says, and we should probably follow the law.
Madam Chair, Madam Co-Chair, as you'll recall, we had this conversation in Thermopolis, and I think it's been an afterthought at times for the committee. We don't do a lot of legislation. We don't do a lot of that. And I agree completely with what you said. We should be here every year. My board would love to be here. We do have a select committee we meet with annually, and we do that twice. But that is not the same as being in front of this committee. So I'll take that to heart. I think that's something, Lucas, that he and I can work on and make sure that we get this done every year. Ideally, if we could do that, our August meeting is when we do a field tour, and we did it this year the day before your meeting, but if we could do it to where we did our select committee field tour and then met with TRW at that August meeting, we could do all of that, and you could all go on that tour, because they are amazing. When you see how jazzed people are about what they're doing on the ground, it's amazing. This state's way cool.
Well, thank you. And then maybe to add to the list, we should probably get a list of everything that we should be doing. Maybe not just them, this trust, but just make sure every year we're checking the box, so we're meeting those obligations. And,
That's a good point.
as we're planning interims, coordinating a little bit more and better with you so that those opportunities are there. So just food for thought. Thank you.
Director Bud, thank you. Appreciate it. Appreciate your time and your work. What's that? Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Winter, did you have a comment?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Director Bud, you mentioned that you've been doing some work with the tribes on the reservation and with wild horses. I didn't think I heard what they were doing. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Madam Chair, Representative Winter, they are removing wild horses, feral horses. And the legislature last year actually allocated funding to help with that. They don't have adequate resources God bless them, they've been doing the best job they could, but they've been doing it with 4-wheelers and horses. And so if you're going to do it, you've got to get in and do it on a major scale. And so I think that you'll see us continue to help as the legislature did in dealing with that issue. We're very fortunate that the tribes have, as a sovereign nation, have a different set of rules that they can follow. And as such, we can probably be way more effective there than we can in other places. So that's where we're headed. Yes, sir.
Yes, Senator.
Madam Chairman, just real quickly, we're trying to figure out which select committee you visit with, Director Bud.
Madam Chair, it's in the statute, it's called the Select Natural Resource Funding Committee.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Senator Guru is on that committee, and on this one as well.
I used to be and couldn't
yes,
remember
yes,
the
sir.
name of it, so thank you very much.
All you senators have to wear a lot of different hats. All right, do we have any further questions or comments for Director Bud? Again, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank all of you. Appreciate your service and appreciate your assistance. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, committee. We are on for lunch from 12 to 1:30. That seems like an awful long time, but I guess we have to stick to the agenda, huh? So we're a little ahead of schedule. Does anybody have anything they want to discuss before we break for lunch? Any questions? Okay. Well, with that, we will break for lunch, and we are back in at 1:30, and I would ask everybody to be very prompt and here, so we're ready to rock and roll at 1:30. Thank you.